네, 잠시 안내 말씀 먼저 드리도록 하겠습니다. 잠시 후부터 도시와 공간 포럼 2023이 시작될 예정입니다. 참석하실 분들께서는 장내로 입장하셔서 모두 자리 착석을 부탁드리겠습니다. 또 오늘 행사는 한국어, 영어 동시 통역으로 진행이 될 예정입니다. 또 수신기가 저에게 테이블 위에 또 두었는데요. 한국어는 1번, 영어는 2번 채널로 이용해 주시면 되겠습니다. 또 수신기를 다 사용하신 후에는 테이블에 그대로 두시고 이동하시면 되겠습니다. 네, 그럼 잠시 후에 또 도시와 공간 포럼 시작될 예정이니까요. 잠시만 기다려 주시길 부탁드리겠습니다. 감사합니다. 네, 그리고 혹시 자리하신 곳에 수신기가 없으면 뒤쪽이죠. 네, 뒤쪽에 통역 부스 쪽에 저희가 여분의 수신기가 준비되어 있으니까요. 또 함께 하시면 되겠습니다. 감사합니다. 네, 이제 모든 분들께서
Right, it seems that all our guests are ready. Then let me officially begin the forum today.
도시와 공간 포럼 2023
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Welcome to the City and Space Forum 2023. Let me greet you and let me introduce myself. My name is Lim Hee-jung and I'll be guiding you through today's event. Nice to meet you all.
네, 6월이 시작된 지 이제 딱 일주일이 됐습니다.
Well, it has been just a week since the start of June. We're on 7th June, and we would like to thank you very much for making your way to this forum despite your tight schedule early in the morning. And as you all know, yesterday was the Memorial Day, and we had a long weekend when we started June. So I guess that this is the real start and the very start of June as a new month. And I am very much excited and glad to be here with you to be part of this event, meaningful event. And first of all, despite your tight schedule, all the VIPs and guests are present here today numerously. Let me firstly introduce our VIPs before we kick off the forum in the earnest. When each name is called out, please give a big hand. First and foremost, we have Chairman Kim Sang-soo of the Federation of Korean Construction Entities. Please welcome him with a big hand. Thank you. And next is Secretary General Lee Kwang-ju of the National Assembly of Korea. Please give a hand to him. And the next guest is Honorable Kim Jong-jae of the People Power Party. And next is Honorable Kim Byung-woo of the Democratic Party. Thank you. And next is Honorable Lee In-sun, member of the People Power Party. And we also have Honorable Ha Eun-ah of the People Power Party. And next we have Director Park Young-bin of the Construction Mutual Aid Association. Welcome. And next is Director Lee Chung-jae of the Korea Institute of Construction Industry. Please welcome him with a hand. And next we have President Lee Han-jun of the Korea Land and Housing Corporation. Welcome. And next is Chairman Yoon Young-koo of the Korea Construction Engineers Association. Please welcome him. And next is we have Chairman Cho In-ho of the Korean Mechanical Facility Construction Association. And we have permanent member Kwon Dae-young of the Financial Services Commission. And following, we have Mr. Cha Soo-hwan, Deputy Director of the Financial Supervisory Services, and President and CEO Lee Kang-hoon of KIND. Please welcome him with a hand. And the next is Vice President Park Seung-da of the Trade Insurance Corporation. And following, we have CEO Daniel Libeskind of the Studio Libeskind. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. And next is Managing Partner Lee Eui-sang of Morphosis Asia. And we also have Professor John Hong of Architecture at Seoul National University. And last but not least at all, the host of this forum, Korea Economic Daily presents President Park Seung-jun. Please welcome him with a big hand. Well, please understand that even though we are with many numerous VIP guests who are present today, but please understand that due to time constraints, I am not able to call out each and everyone's name. Before we begin the event, let's first watch the themed video.
무한한 가능성으로 성장을 멈추지 않는 도시. 도시 공간은 이제 융복합을 넘어 초연결 미래 도시로 가능성을 확장합니다. 혁신으로 점점 가까워지는 미래 도시 공간. 새 시대를 관통하는 인사이트로 도시와 공간의 빛나는 가치를 직접 느껴보세요. 미래 도시와 공간, 그리고 생태계 진단으로 인류가 맞이할 내일을 명료하게 밝히는 파워풀 싱크탱크. 올해 창립 59주년을 맞이한 대한경제가 제3회 도시와 공간 포럼을 개최합니다. 도시와 공간, 국내외 탑티어 전문가들이 한자리에 모여 초연결 시대 미래 도시 핵심 K 스마트 시티와 팽창하는 도시의 새로운 대안, 수직 도시, 운송, 교통, 그리고 4차 산업혁명과의 결합으로 새롭게 다가올 기회와 혜택, 디지털 금융으로 더욱 강화될 미래 도시를 진단하고 그리고 ICT로 초연결될 미래 도시의 놀랍고 다채로운 삶까지 그 인프라와 소프트웨어를 최고의 도시 공간 전문가들이 진단하고 제시합니다. 미래 도시와 초연결 2023 제3회 대한경제 도시와 공간 포럼이 바로 지금 그 길을 제시합니다.
네, 박수 한번 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you. Please give a big hand. Well, that promotional video gave us a lot more high expectation to the content and to the discussion of today's forum. And I would like to appreciate the presence of everyone who is here with us despite their busy schedule, as well as those who couldn't join us on site but are supporting us online through the Korea Economy YouTube channel. We extend once again our gratitude to all of you. It's the third edition this year. The City and Space Forum was initially established as a platform to address the space economy during the pandemic in 2021. And this year's forum centers around the theme of city and space, future cities, and hyperconnectivity. Well, what is the evolutionary aspect of the city that we expect? We could have endless discussions and ideas and insights about this question, and also the influx of population into megacities driven by the pursuit of a convenient lifestyle has given rise to numerous societal challenges, even it is inevitable phenomena. Additionally, technological advancements increase the life expectancy, and the growing demand for safety have necessitated a reimagining of traditional urban spaces. And also today we aim to engage in a comprehensive discussion on life in the future city, exploring the evolving software and physical infrastructure from diverse perspectives. And also to provide a range of insights and opinions, I know that you have high expectation to the discussion of the renowned architect Daniel Rebeskind, along with experts from both domestic and international backgrounds, to deliver lectures and participate in discussions. We kindly request that you remain seated until the end, as we anticipate a wealth of valuable insights and thought-provoking ideas to be shared. And today's event will begin with the opening ceremony and keynote sessions in the morning, and that will follow by 4 theme sessions in the afternoon. Now, without further ado, let's commence the City and Space Forum 2023 in the earnest.
Now we would like to invite the chairperson, the president of the Federation of the Construction Association, Mr. Kim Sang-soo, for opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a big round of applause. So greetings, ladies and gentlemen. First off, I would like to ask for your understanding. I actually I kept the air conditioner on, so that's why I have some sore throat now. So sorry about that. This is not a cold, just sore throat. Greetings, I am Kim Sang-soo, the President of the Federation of Construction Associations. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Secretary General Lee Kwang-jae of the National Assembly Secretariat for graciously taking the time out of his busy schedule to attend this meeting. In addition, I would recognize the following members of the National Assembly: Representative Kim Byung-woo, Representative Kim Jong-jae, Representative Choi In-ho, Representative Lee In-sun, Representative Ho Young, and Representative Ho Eun-ah. Thank you so much for your gracious presence. At the same time, due to the time constraint, I can't name each and every one of you, but I would like to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who are here with us in City and Space Forum hosted by the Korea Economic Paper. City and Space Forum, which has been presenting visions for cities and spaces, has now reached its third anniversary. For the first time of its kind in Korea, City and Space Forum provided a platform for discourse on spatial economy, and it has now established itself as a leading brand of the Korea Economy Paper and a successful case of Global Business Forum. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Park Sung-jun, the Korea Economy Paper, for planning and preparing meaningful events. Ranging from the extensive road network of ancient Rome spanning 80,000 kilometers to the Great Wall of China throughout human history, a word used across civilizations is connectivity. In particular, in order to enjoy a high-quality living environment, modern cities of today have become the result of efforts to connect anyone, anytime, and anywhere. Now, as humanity enters the era of the fourth industrial revolution, we are facing an era of hyperconnectivity that goes beyond mere connection. Not only in physical spaces, but also virtual spaces, it became a role of us, construction professionals, that helps people unfold diverse everyday life. In this respect, with the theme of future cities and hyperconnectivity, this forum showcases visions of achievable spaces, and we are excited more than ever before. Especially, we have a pleasure to have a renowned architect and Daniel Lebeskind, who has undertaken major projects on a global scale, and Lee Sung, the director of the Global Architectural Form Morphosis this time. Along with them, other professionals will attend this forum to discuss the architecture of future cities. In this sense, I am sure the forum should be a very meaningful opportunity to learn about different perspectives. I hope that the forum today gathers the profound discussions and wisdom of the professionals. I would like to express our deepest gratitude to all the distinguished guests, both domestic and international, for joining us and generously sharing their valuable time. We also extend our appreciations to the two keynote speakers as well as the presenters and panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Kim Sang-soo. I think he has more messages to convey. We have just listened to the congratulatory and welcoming remarks of Chairman Kim Sang-soo.
So it was really impressive that he said civilization, across civilization, is connectivity. So we're going into more discussions on it with the theme of space and cities, and how can we connect cities, and how can we create a connectivity across cities. That should be discussed. I hope that he'll get over the sore throat soon. So I myself am using my voices. So sometimes, quite often, I have a sore throat. For me, trokiza is the best drop for me. So I think this is my advice to you, Mr. the President Kim. And please make sure you drink hot water as often as possible. Now we would like to invite General Secretary Lee Kwang-jae of the National Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome him.
Very nice to meet you all. Well, we said that when you try to get a well water, then you never forget the person who has digged that well. And would like to give a big round of applause to Chairman Kim Sang-soo and all those who are dreaming of the future of engineering in the city. Well, I have studied a little bit about the cities, and let me share my short-sighted opinions. I am sorry for that, for doing so in front of many experts. And city is a recipient of population. Before we had the era of agriculture and mass production, and we're now living in the era of digital information. And what kind of cities do we need now? That's the core question and core theme that we should discuss today. And secondly, the humanities and human society has been led by the leadership of the governance and also the leaders and the state leaders who have dreamed of a city. And Agrippa and Augustus, after Augustus, I came to know that Agrippa has built up the foundation for Roman city. President Park Chung-hee has made a foundation of industrial cities such as Pohang, Ulsan, and former President Chun Doo-hwan has made a 1 million population city of industrial complexes, and also former President Moon also has dreamt of a Sejong city. And what kind of cities do we have ahead of us? Well, I think that the production area will be the city in the future, and also we are facing the climate changes and also aging population, and to solve and address these issues, and happy city should be a platform, and the city should be the most commerciable item in that sense. The challenges against the Neom city in Saudi Arabia, or the move of the capital city of Indonesia, and the efforts for making a new city in Australia, these are the start and the advent of new city era. And since the Korean War, Korea has made a lot of new cities, and Korea is known to be one of the leading cities in infrastructures of IT. And one of the big 3 mega cities will be out of Asian region. In that sense, we need to conglomerate all advanced technologies, and that needs resources and assets. And Chairman Lee Kwang-ho deals with the infrastructure fund, and the core is the energy and the resources of waters and electricity. So your fund should be gathering more than 2 trillion Korean won. So please welcome them as a token of appreciation and encouragement. Well, actually, I visited the HQ of Microsoft in San Francisco, and I came to read this. Those who conquer the areas of the city will conquer the world. And I am confident in the realization of that phrase. Well, Microsoft also will be converted into the areas for mobile phones and for cities. Who will conquer these will define the future of the city, if it will be a happy city or if it will be another type of city. So I would like to ask all of you present here to be interested in the areas of a city, to live our lives more happier, and please be the explorer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Lee Kwang-jae. Well, the first discovery, the first invention in human being was the city, according as we said. And many people are gathered together now. If you cannot really find any empty seat, maybe you can go up to the Sapphire Hall on the 2nd floor. So you can actually join us on YouTube in the Sapphire Hall. And now we would like to invite the next member of the National Assembly, Chung Jae-kyung from the People Power Party, and he is also the Secretary of the Land, Infrastructure and Transport Committee. Very nice to meet you all. First off, I was told that this forum marks the 3rd anniversary, and it's my great pleasure to see you all here today, thanks to the Korea Economic Paper. I don't have much ideas and knowledge about this forum and its space and cities, but it's my honor to have this opportunity to share with you my ideas. Listening to Mr. Lee, we can imagine many different functions of cities, including AI and autonomous cars and so on and so forth. And such technologies will actually fill the libraries and public spaces. And I think that should be the future of the cities. But my question is this: what such future cities can give us? Why we want to create such cities? I think it's because we have a desire to be happier. Sometimes we are to have too much desires, but then can we really create a happy city? Where convenience is equal to happiness, you think? If it is the case, then everything that we are pursuing should be true, but I think we have to think about equality. I was born in Pohang, which is not Seoul. But in Pohang, you can see a mix of a different landscape, including rural and urban areas. And I went around the city, and Pohang is completely different from Seoul in terms of landscape. I didn't see many changes in Pohang. I actually saw a very small villages with many grandmothers. There's no changes in such rural and remote areas. So I guess you experts and professionals will talk about the future of cities. But I hope that the future of cities and city futures should be shared with remote and rural areas. What I found from rural areas was about the rural style of public spaces, including even public toilets and galleries, and so on and so forth. You see even the restrooms here in FKI buildings is quite luxurious, but in rural areas, even the toilets of the galleries are very humble, too humble. So I hope that in future of cities or future cities, there's no isolated or marginalized areas and regions. Well, I saw the theme of a poetic city of the first keynote speaker, so I hope that being poetic should be a part of the urban ecosystem so that we feel really warm. You see the running things on the screen. Maybe we're constantly pursuing just the speed and growth. But that might be something that human being is pursuing, but we need a rest. By doing so, we can create a better future of the Republic of Korea. And this is my favor to you, professional architects. On the way to the hall, I actually read a news article about this forum. What was impressive was this. I read a line that an architect can work properly only when the architect can reach 50s. Well, the keynote speaker's name is Daniel Libeskind, which is quite challenging to pronounce, and he actually built a Jewish museum in Berlin at his 52. And I looked into the museums by reading, and I saw many interdisciplinary scent, including humanities. So I'm going to listen to the keynote speeches of two speakers and leave the hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Honorable Kim Kyung-jae, and thank you very much for your plan to keep your seat until the end of this keynote session. It just said that it's the human who adorns the city in pursuit of happiness. Thank you very much. And next, we have Honorable Kim Byung-uk of Democratic Party, who will be delivering his welcome remarks. Please welcome him to the stage with a big hand. Please, let us have time to arrange the stage. Let me greet you first. My name is Kim Byung-woo, a member of the National Assembly representing Bundang District. Well, while waiting for the stage to be arranged, I was wondering if they have forgotten that I am here on the stage. But, okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And Chairman Kim Sang-soo, I know that you have been an energetic person without exception, but it is quite regrettable to see that you have a sore throat. Please recover soon. And President Park Seung-jae of the Korea economy, I am sorry to say this, but Korea's economic power is growing more than expected, and not only in the area of construction and finance, but Korea economy has been developing very soon in a remarkable way. So I think that it is partially because that you are fully backed up by the Korean Association of Construction Entities, and I wish for your continuous growth. This is the third edition of the forum, and I am also attending this forum for the third time. And I still remember the first kind of this forum. It was during the pandemic period, and I was in charge of the National Assembly's Land and Infrastructure Transport Committee as a secretary. And I was invited to come here, and I was quite surprised to see the well-organized discussion sessions and the ample information that I received. That was quite helpful to have an idea about the laws. So please give a big hand to the organizer. And I hope that I would be able to exchange ideas with you as much as possible. The City and Space Forum has shed a light on the concept of city and space and their economy, which was not a clear idea to all of us. Well, land can be interpreted as space, I guess, and to earn a basic living, how can we maximize the utilization of a space where we live, and what types of satisfaction can we get from it, and what kind of future ideas do we have to have? These are the basic and also primordial questions. And also, as Ms. Kim has just mentioned, this forum has firstly delivered the necessity to think about this basic idea. And as said earlier, I am representing the Bundang district, and one of the biggest challenges that should be addressed in our district is what should we do with the newly developed cities. There are many planned cities or densified cities. Instead of creating a new city in a new space, but considering the aging population, what is more urgent for us is to how to transform aging cities into a new one, and this is a common ground where we sit all together. But one important thing is that in an aging city or aged city, we have owners in every parcel. When we establish a new city plan, we can make a new city from scratch by acquiring greenbelt area, for instance. But in case of an aged city, we all have owners for each parcel. So having a big picture of a new city and also getting a permission from those owners respectively, and striking a balance between these two to lead a new city development project to a success is the key. And as a representative of Bundang district, if we could establish a apartment complex in an aged city, it is quite a challenging issue to me, and we could also have contentious discussions on privileges that is given to a specific entity. But considering a necessity for a new space where we could live together in a happy way, then I think that it will be more easier for us to have a big idea together so that we can get approvals from the National Assemblies easily. And the smart city, as you all know, Korea is quite advanced in infrastructures of IT, and we're equipped with appropriate infrastructures. And compared to the past, we are now trying to incorporate the concept of green into smart cities. In that sense, we need some modifications of the existing laws related to smart cities. But as we have accumulated technologies that could be utilized in a smart way for a new city development project, I am sure that that will be the growth engine for future Korea, and that will influence all Korean people so that they can have the outstanding quality new cities in the future. Well, I have looked through different themes of this forum today, and I came to realize that you are dealing with many different topics and ideas, and also Mr. Daniel Libeskind, who I know that you have designed in Samsung-dong area, the HQ of Hyundai Industrial Development Company's HQ. Well, and this was the first time that I came to know that you were the hero of that design. So I am very much looking forward to the ideas and discussions so that I can reflect the result of the discussion to the enactment process. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Kim Byung-wook. Well, thank you very much for being with us for the third time, and I would like to ask you for your participation until the 14th edition of this forum.
And Mr. Kim Ki-yeon, the representative of the People's Power Party, was unable to attend to this forum. There are more people that failed to attend to this forum. And first up, I would like to introduce Mr. Kim Ki-yeon. And he kind of sent a written congratulatory speech. Mr. Kim conveyed his congratulations and expressed his hope that this forum would provide an opportunity to propose ideas and value creation in cities and spaces. He also mentioned that he wishes for the further growth of the Korea Economic Paper, which constantly strives to provide differentiated content, and extended his wishes for the health and happiness of all participants. And then,
furthermore, Minister Won Hee-ryong of the Land Infrastructure Transport has sent a message, quote, "I sincerely congratulate the Third City and Space Forum. I will personally join you shortly and participate in the lively discussions." Well, he will join us during the afternoon session, so once he is with us, please welcome him. Thank you.
반갑습니다. 서울시장 오세훈입니다. 먼저 2023
hello, I'm Mayor Oh Se-eun of Seoul. First off, my congratulations on 2023 City and Space Forum, which holds great significance. I would like to express my gratitude to President Park Seung-soon of the Korean Economic Paper and the architect Daniel Libeskind, who will deliver the keynote speech, as well as all the participants with their interest in future cities. Last year, I participated in the forum in person and made a presentation on the Seoul Vision 2030. But this time, unfortunately, I'm sending congratulatory video message alone. I was told that in today's forum, amid the waves of rapidly changing social transformation, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and digital transformation, the role of cities as the foundation of life would be discussed. Aligning with these trends, Seoul City is actively pursuing various policies to become a global top 5 future city. Last year, the vision for Seoul as a future city through initiatives such as high-rise building clusters, coexisting with greenery and forests, urban regeneration strategies, and the 2030 Seoul Urban Master Plan was announced as a blueprint of future city. Furthermore, in March, aiming to enhance the attractiveness and convenience of the Han River and transform it into a beloved urban space for all, the Hangang Renaissance 2.0 project was announced and being in progress. I hope today's forum can provide in-depth discussions and debates on cities and spaces, that it will undoubtedly offer valuable insights, which we will make efforts to incorporate and reflect in our policies. Thank you.
Thank you, and please give a hand to our mayor. And it was the last welcome remarks by the Mayor Oh Se-hoon. Last year, he was here present in person, but this year he has sent us a congratulatory message. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to express my gratitude once again to your presence. Well, actually, we are with a number of VIPs and guests present today, and let me introduce our VIPs once again who were not called out just before. And Honorable Horan, would you please come up onto the stage and give us a short message to us? Please welcome the Honorable Ha with a big hand. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to say a word. I understand that you have a high expectation to the keynote lecture, and I am Ha Eun-ah of the People Power Party, and I am very much interested in this concept of city and the brand, and that's why I am here. But I can't keep my seat until the end. I will bring the materials, and also I will look through the YouTube video later on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for making a kind word, even though this was requested promptly. And Mr. Yoon Do-hyun, Honorable of the People Power Party, please come up to the stage and make a short message.
Well, before excellent keynote speeches, I don't want to make any troubles to speak too long. I just hope that good ideas will be shared and discussed. I think one of the most important three things is housing for human being, I think. So construction culture and housing culture will be enlightened with these discussions because the discussion will show a future direction, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you. And followingly, other welcome remarks will be delivered during the afternoon session. You have long awaited for the keynote session. The City and Space Forum 2023 is now ready for the keynote session. Please put on the receivers of the simultaneous interpretation, and the first lecture will be delivered by CEO and architect Daniel Libeskind, who will come up onto the stage and should be welcomed very warmly with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. I'm a great admirer of Korea, the Korean people, and the cities that Korea has built. It's an amazing, inspiring thing for architects to look at Korea and its advanced thinking about how people today and in the future will live. I gave it this name, Poetic City. What does poetic mean? It's not something la-la land. Poetic means creative. How to make something which is creative. And I think that's the core that I want to communicate. The importance of a creative city, not just a functioning city, not just a nice city, not just a successful economic city, but a creative city which gives power to the human imagination. This is a quote from a great Japanese poet who wrote this in the 17th century. He said, "The secret of poetry lies in the middle path between the reality and the vacuity of the world," which means between the reality of the world and the emptiness of the world. And to choose that middle line, that balance between the two extremes of order and disorder, that is really the core of what I would call a poetic city, that balance between things, between reality and emptiness. Well, I made these little drawings because I think this is important, that we now live really in a global village. This is absolutely true already for a long time. We have a new age of tribal involvement. We are all kind of in the tribes together, and our global environment is the backyard. It's not the backyard of a house anymore, a backyard of an apartment building, a backyard of a suburb, but the global city is really the environment in which we live. So we have to think, I think, about really what's happening everywhere, and that's our backyard. Well, this is just a little diagram, how we have moved from the mechanic to the information era. You remember the mechanical era with the machinery, which is also what we know about the press, how the press originated, the highways, the postal routes, steam engine, the railway, and of course electrical information then, a new era, which brought us, television, telegraph, telephone, leading us to the information era. So we are living in a different era. We are not living in the mechanical era. We are not even living in the electrical era. We are now in the information era. And of course, it was the electrical era which brought the world close together, because it sort of crossed the borders. That's why China and Asia rose so rapidly, because it was not because of the mechanical era, but because of the electrical era. Now, this is an important idea, I think, that all social change is brought by technology. Everything is by technology. And look at today. We are amputating our own being. Literally, we are cutting off our organs and giving them to another set of things, like neural networks, like AI, artificial intelligence. So we are farming out our eyes, our hands, our digits, our hearts to another kind of world of virtual systems. And I think that has a very big implication. Think about it. We know from medical science that the human brain is actually shrinking, because we are not remembering anymore. We are not having to do the things we had to do 100, 200, 300 years ago. So self-amputation is a very radical idea to understand also the benefits of the technology, but also the shortcomings. What do we do in the era of AI? So compare the two diagrams I made. On the left is the Western world, based on really the Western idea of ancient Greece, which is based on a phonetic alphabet, based on the continuity, the uniformity, and the connectedness of everything. And it's really a rational world and a pictorial world. That's what it is. That old world of the West is a picture world and a world of reason. Now, our world today, in the information era, as I have it, is the digital technological world, which means it's a world of differences, a world of complexity, a world of also disruption, which means that we are not living anymore in that rational world, but I would call it the post-pictorial world. It's no longer what fits just into a picture, and also I would call it the hieroglyphic world, because it's post-alphabet. That's the emojis, that's the images we send to each other. That's a completely different way of communicating and understanding who we are, where we are. So the electric information systems give us a new perception, and the eye, which used to be like the king of the world, has lost its predominance. The eye has lost its central role. And now we have the other senses. So the end of monopoly of visual space. Now we have the space of the hand, of the nose, of the senses. Totally different world than just the world of the old Western idea of what the world is. So this is just a little summary. The mechanical era was the era of nations, a national era, an era of conformity. Everybody marched to the same drum, and it was the cog and wheel, right? The cog and the wheel in the masses. The electric era is the era without borders. That was, of course, later on. Telematic era, electrical era, alternating current, direct current. The information era was just past us. Interactive era, I also call it the narcissist era. The era where everything is about you. Everything comes to you like a narcissus looking at the mirror. And it's the era of the screen. That's the era we are just leaving behind. And now we have the post-information era, which is the era of identity, finding identity. It's an era of experience and search for community. So I call it an era of sensations, a sensational era. So that's my really final conclusion, that we are between two really dangers. Total planning is a danger, and no planning is a danger. Those are the big dangers that really can swallow up the world. So those are the threats, I think, total planning and total no planning. Democracy, of course, hinges in the balance, like that quote of Basho, between reality and vacuity. We have to keep the balance. Not everything is planned and not everything is unplanned. Let me give you two examples. In Nazi Germany, the one linear system of housing in Prora, this was built by Hitler as an ideal new city. People living in mile-long, line, totally inhuman, totally ridiculous, a total failure. That's what I consider total planning that has failed. The kind of authoritarian idea of let's decide how people will live, we will do it. Of course, the other failure is the chaos. That is the slums of Mumbai or wherever, the complete lack of any authority to. So we have to find a balance. That's the balance that I call the poetic city. So let me share with you the first project that I did, because I started architecture quite late. This was my first building, which opened in 2001. I never built a building beforehand. The Jewish Museum in Berlin, of course, deals with really history that is so difficult. The murder, not just of 6 million Jews, but 50 million people were perished during that fascist and Nazi era. I was asked to do, and I won a competition, to build a museum that speaks about history, speaks about what are we doing today with that history? How do we create a democratic understanding in our era? So there is the building, there is the Baroque building, which was the old museum, and I added this zigzagging of history, and you'll notice that across it runs a straight line, kind of this interrupted straight line, which is really, I would call, the void. It's the absence, it's the void that exists in history, exists in Berlin, exists in Germany, because it is a void created by extinction of people through militarism. You see the Holocaust Tower to the left, you see the Garden of Exile there on the left, and the court that I built subsequently. So, two buildings, Baroque building, built, very famous one, the old courthouse of Berlin, the new building, with no bridges between them. So the bridge is really totally in the underground. You have to find the history in the invisible light of the underground. It's not the visible history. Of course, the underground is important, and in this underground, you see really three roads which go to different destinations. One goes to a dead end, which is the Holocaust, the end of Germany, the end of Berlin as we know it, the murder of people. The second road goes to the exile, Garden of Exile, where people were exiled, and the city itself was exiled from its own history. And then the third one goes to the continuity of history across this abyss. There is the Holocaust Tower, which is really, it's a museum, but this space has no air conditioning in the summer, has no heating in the winter. It's just you're alone in the darkness with a slit of light that shows you that in the greatest darkness, there is also light. We have to deal with the capacity of human beings to make terrible things to each other and to understand where we are today in Berlin, which is not only a capital of Germany, but a great creative city. The Garden of Exile is, again, vegetation grows up high. The garden is tilted, so when you get there, you have a feeling that you're on a displaced boat. You don't feel like you're just walking in a garden, but it's a very special experience for the body. And that's what I meant by sensational. Sensations are important. It's not just for the head anymore. It's really for the whole body that we have to create architecture. So there is the Garden of Exile. There is the building with thousands or more different windows, which really represent a kind of invisible map of Berlin. The stair of continuity, which connects you through the different roads that I showed you. The map that is really, these are not windows, but really a map of an invisible Berlin, which you have access to once you are in the museum itself. And of course, the bridges that connect you across the void. That's the center. The center is an echoing chamber. And by the way, it's also a completion of an opera of a great composer, Arnold Schoenberg, who was exiled from Berlin. He was one of the greatest creators of modern music. And he wrote an opera called Moses and Aaron, which he did not complete. He could not complete it. But I completed it in the footsteps of the visitors across this void. That's the answer in that segment. And of course, new activities of the museum continue to develop. This is now a court. When I started the museum, there was no expectations of many people coming together, eating together, having fun. But the museum has turned to be one of the most really visited museums in all of Germany. Of course, it does not have masterpieces, but it has history as the theme of telling a story, and it tells a story. And I think that's very important, that buildings should tell stories. They should not just be abstract spaces, abstract forums for discussion. They should themselves tell a story, and the building can tell a story. That's really the important part of my work. World Trade Center, master plan. There it is. Lower Manhattan, the 16 acres. That attack happened exactly on the day when the Jewish Museum was to open in Berlin. It's a fate of mine that 9/11 was the opening of the Jewish Museum, which of course did not happen because of the attacks on New York. There was such global uncertainty what it meant. But that's the project that then I was entrusted to do, the master plan of that incredibly important site. So that's my kind of initial drawings. I do everything by, sketching. I don't just start with a computer, but what is the idea? The idea was very simple. First of all, don't build anything where people perished. Even though nobody declared this a sacred site, it was just a commercial site, very expensive. Every square centimeter is very expensive. But I said, no, nothing should really be built in the center where the building stood, because that's where thousands of people perished. And to create the buildings, really create the density, 10 million square feet of density, really on the edges of the site. So bring light to a memorial space, create a public space, really, and go all the way down to the bedrock to give people a sense of where they are and who they are. Really, it's about democracy. It's about New York. It's about reinventing the entire space of Lower Manhattan. Well, of course, it's probably, there were 5,000 architects in the competition. Just think about it. It was the biggest competition in the world because people were interested. What do you do in such a great city in New York that was selected precisely as a symbolic city of democracy to be destroyed? So I don't show this to you, from vanity, but the fact that every single person, every single decision that I had to make was under magnifying glass. It had to be really every New Yorker, every American, every person around the world wanted to know exactly why and what will happen on this site. So on the left is really my drawing of the site. The buildings, really, 1776, the tallest building, Freedom Tower, 1776 is just a number, but it's also the date of the Declaration of Independence, a first document of human rights. And of course, the other buildings descending. And of course, in the center are the footprints with the waterfalls, museum, and a performing arts center. And that's really today, how you kind of see it. And that's what I want to see, that master plan. It's easy enough to design an imaginary plan, but I'm interested in plans that can actually be realized. And you have to realize that within 5 years, all the economic, political, social conditions change. So how do we create something that can actually be built and experienced by people? So there it is, really the largest public space that has been created in Lower Manhattan. It has the 20 million, or maybe more, 25 million people every year coming to the site, even after COVID. It's the most visited site, and of course, it's also a spiritual site. It's a site that was determined in my design with this wall. It's called the slurry wall. You remember seeing it probably right after the attacks. But it's a wall that is a dam. On the left side are the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, of the Hudson River. If that wall did not stand, all of the subways and undergrounds of New York would have been inundated by flooding. So I also thought this wall symbolizes something important about democracy, about people working together. And there it is. It's really the center of the 9/11 Museum, which tells the story of that terrible day, but also what it means for the future. And of course, it's not easy to
네, 물론 이렇게 기초 자체를 저보다 보여주기는 쉽지 않습니다. 기초 골조는 이미 숨겨져 있죠. 하지만 저는 뉴욕 항만청의 엔지니어들과 같이 협업을 하고요. 그리고 또 연방정부, 뉴욕 주지사, 뉴욕 시장, 그리고 뉴욕 항만청, 그리고 미국의 모든 국민들, 그리고 대통령, 그리고 희생자의 가족들 모두가 저의 고객이었다라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 이 공간에서는 굉장히 특별한 경험을 모두가 할 수 있었던 겁니다. 폴 프란시스 교황님께서 이쪽을 방문을 하시고 나서요, 저희에게
Central Park or Times Square or St. Paul's Cathedral, he addressed religious solidarity among people from the wall that really speaks to you about what holds, what is true, what is not really negotiable, what cannot be falsified. And that's important in our world when you see the thousands of names imprinted on the waterfalls. And by the way, when I proposed the waterfalls, it was very critical. People, criticized, how can you bring Niagara Falls to New York? How crazy is it to bring water? But I felt that you need it to bring nature into the center of New York, and also to the acoustical sense, because I used to be a musician in my former lifetime. The acoustics are important to screen the loud sounds of city all around you. So it's about light, and another element I call the wedge of light. There it is. It's an element that is determined, not completely yet visible, because it's determined by the hours of the attack, 8:46 a.m. and 10:28 a.m. when the second tower collapsed. And it's really determined by the PETH terminal, one of the skylights, tower number 2, which is not yet built, but you will experience this space of light with the times of that tragedy in memorial of the sky. It's not a memorial in stone, it's a memorial of sunlight. And I think that's very important to bring nature and a sense of understanding that memory is also part of nature. So there it is. It's really an incredibly lively place. The Performing Arts Center, you see there is just under construction. It will open in a couple of months. So again, within a relatively short time and a very many controversies, the important was to bring people together around a plan. And of course, I'm lucky to be working in Shanghai, where I'm building a huge part of the city of Shanghai, which unfortunately I cannot share it with you. But in this democracy, things are always turbulent, always not easy. You have to bring people together, and I think that's the story of architecture. So there it is, as you will see it, a completely new public space, a space that, by the way, the buildings that you see represent the density of an American city, like Baltimore or Denver. That's how much density is on the site. Even the second building is still much taller than the Empire State Building. So it's a whole city really in high-rise buildings, and of course, at the focus is public space, space for people to be. And of course, because I was an immigrant to New York, I came by a ship, like most immigrants at that time. I understood the Statue of Liberty. I understood what it means to be free, because I lived in Poland, I lived under communism. I understood what it means, and that's really the symbol of the entire space that I developed in that Ground Zero memorial. Very different city, which I also lived in, Milano, Italy, one of the most beautiful Renaissance cities, Baroque cities. I created the master plan, and I also worked with my good friend in the center, Zaha Hadid, and Arata Isozaki from Japan. And I did the master plan, and we did also the towers, each one of us. There is the site today. It really lies pretty much in the center of a great historical city, but it was a kind of a gray site. What was it? It was the Fiera di Milano, very polluted land, you know, from the 1920s, all the fairgrounds and so on. And there was an opportunity how really to bring this as a piece of a city again. Now, it was an international competition, just like Ground Zero, with all the fantastic architects. But my idea was very different from my colleagues, which is to create a center, a kind of central piazza with 3 dramatic skyscrapers, but base it in a park. Really, don't really just impose another grid of the city again, but create a city that's truly sustainable, with a lot of green space for people, for kids, place to come to. So imagine, this is a city, Milan is a city full of asphalt and concrete. It's a very hot city during the summer, but to create really a completely new idea of what the city can be. And of course, we had our internal competition with Zaha and Isozaki, and they approved that I should do the master plan. That is my master plan, to create really a shift in the 19th century, 20th century idea of a city. So, of course, we all built housing. The housing has to be very high class, high density housing, and I built thousands of really units here. That's my project. Really still based on the classical courtyards of Milano, with a simple core buildings, simple functional building, but buildings which are shaped to give light and also enjoy the terraces that really brought so many people to this housing so rapidly, which allowed the site to be rebuilt very, very rapidly. You can see my last tranche of housing is just going on. It's just being completed in the next month. And you can see that this model of how to create within a historical city, really a different city, an ecological city, sustainable city, has now spread. There are 3 or 4 major sites in Milan that have been successfully really using this model. The piazza is visited by 3 million people a month, not tourists, but people from Italy, from Milano, because it offers a different sense from the historical 19th century, 18th century city. People like to be there, like to meet their friends. And of course, our PwC tower is also a very special one. It's really kind of part of that kind of dome-like idea of bringing people through the transportation system, that the subway runs right under it, to this magnificent place to work and to live. And there it is, the three sort of cores, the Central Plaza. You can see how Milan has changed so rapidly with just an insertion of ambition, which was, of course, radical and controversial, but really made the city to the most successful city in Italy. It is now, even though Rome is still the capital, of course, Milan is the culture and financial capital of Italy. A very different project, because different scales. A project called Iconique in Nice, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, certainly. And of course, what divides cities are often railway lines. And, you know, they're inaccessible. So I was asked to I won a competition to create really a piece of the city right there. So there is my building. Sometimes you don't have to do a big plan. Sometimes a single building can change a city as well. So that's kind of my sketches for this very important, beautiful city in southern France, Côte d'Azur. There it is, how it sits really at the edge of the railway station, links itself to the historical city, creates a gateway to the disconnected part of the city, and creates really something kind of a wow architecture. It's not just a lot of volume of buildings, but a building that will attract so many people from both the highway, which is on this side, and of course the 19th century streets, and segment and create a kind of sort of symphonic composition, something interesting that competes with the great cities' architecture of 19th and 18th century. So there it is. You can see it under construction. It's kind of a little bit like a horizontal Eiffel Tower. It will have, you know, the leading, you know, Italy will be the leading Italy food store, an emporium will be there. Many Japanese stores will be there. There will be hotels. So cultural aspects as well. Uniqlo and so on. But you can see that it's not just about just creating just mass of commercial space, but creating something that is kind of spectacular and has the ambition of culture in a commercial project. And that's actually important, that commercial projects are also cultural projects, just as cultural projects should be really economically good projects. So there it is. Very soon, I think in a few months, this will be completed. In a very different place, in Finland, Tampere, you know, second largest city in Finland, I created this, again, on top of railways. While the railways were running, the largest really hockey arena, an arena really for entertainment, together with really a new master plan, which I'm continuing as well. So there it is. You can see it in the center there. The arena as a core on the railway line, and a set of high-rise buildings, residential buildings, a park, cultural buildings. And by the way, the mayor of that city said to me, you know, Mr. Liebeskind, we are tired of being just the second largest city in Finland. We want to have a different skyline. We are a more beautiful city, a more desirable city than the capital of Helsinki, but nobody knows it. We want people to know it. And of course, this is now the fastest growing city in Finland. There it is, the arena to the right as an anchor already built, and the buildings in the master plan you can see here. There it lies. It's quite an art to create all of this while the trains are running below, because you have to put the foundations really in between the tracks. It's really an engineering tour de force. And of course, we have a hotel on top of the arena itself. We have high-rise residential buildings. You can see that this is a transformational project. This has brought actually 365 days of activity, because hockey games are limited. You know, it's the central hockey games of the north, but you have entertainment. You have Cirque du Soleil, Rolling Stones, all the various entertainment venues which are really driving the 50 restaurants which are there. 50 restaurants, and it's a small city. It's not as big as Seoul, but it's got 50 restaurants here, and it's kind of spectacular. I think that's important, that people desire in this era of, you know, farming out their organs, in this self-amputational era. They want to have a sensual experience of space and to enjoy kind of the sort of building the city with their own self-identity. So here you see a little bit of what it looks like, the housing, the tracks. It's dense, and you can see that the 19th century, Nordic Finnish architecture is still part of integration in this project. So it's not one or the other, it's the midpoint. It's the balance between things. Not too much planning and not too little planning, just enough to create something interesting for people. And there it is, the winter wonderland of Finland. Very different place in Singapore, one of my favorite places in the world, Reflections. I was able to create this 6 skyscrapers in the residential on this Keppel Bay. Right there you see it, and on the right was a subsequent project of Keppel, which I did, called the Corals, and in the middle is a formulaic project of another era of Keppel. So you can see how history moves on. I wanted to create doubly curved buildings on this old docklands. This was an industrial dock, just like in Milano. It was an industrial land. How to turn it into something beautiful, and there it is, low-rise buildings, and then in the water, the skyscrapers. And of course, that's really the art, how to give the living a sense of centrality and create something really desirable, not just more building volume, but an expressive idea. And expression is part of identity. Expression is part of what we really seek in our new post-information era. So, of course, you can imagine that the double curvature of buildings is spectacular. And my developer, Keppel, said at one point, well, Mr. Libeskind, isn't it enough just to have one curve? Isn't it enough? But I was so happy that the Singapore Housing Authority, Planning Authority, they said, well, we gave this project to Keppel because it had double curvature, because it's sculptural. So the developer agreed to create these very spectacular buildings and really a new community on this beautiful old industrial land, transforming it completely into something that is a symbol of how important living is. It's not only museums and galleries and all these things that are important architecturally. What is important is housing for people, as someone said here, because that's how we judge cities. How well do people live? How do they feel where they live? How much nature do they have? And then that is the Keppel, the Corals, my project later on. You can see the reflections in the background, and you can see that what I did is the opposite. I put the lowest buildings in the front at the best views, and the tallest building, it was zoned. There's a zoning diagram here. But I wanted everybody to have the view of the waterfront. And so everybody does have the view, and it's really a reversal. Instead of putting high-rise buildings in the front, put low-rise buildings. And you can see from these low-rise buildings that you have views really in 365 degrees. Well, here, one of my favorite projects was in Busan. And again, these are very standard buildings. They are really extruded towers. But I thought it's not enough just to have these buildings that all look the same. They're all just, not enough effort has been put into them because they are just too anonymous. So to create on this beautiful peninsula, on this beautiful space, office buildings, different facilities, a hotel, something that is spectacular and changes the notion of how we can view the city as a figurative city, as something that has anatomy to it, something that has a face to it. It's not just formulaic. So you can see the office buildings, you can see the composition, you can see the difference between these buildings and just other buildings, because a lot of effort has gone to create a sense of form, a sense of poetry in the buildings. And here in Supio Tower in Seoul, right in the historical perimeter of this beautiful city, inspired by traditional music, by traditional patterns, I created the Supio Tower, which is, of course, an ambitious tower with public spaces, with a sense of connecting to the culture of Seoul, connecting to the culture of this wonderful country. And at the end, I share with you a project I did some years ago for Yongsan. And I did the master plan. It was a competition. I won the master plan. And then I worked in the second phase with 20 very famous architects, most famous in the world, to create a city. And now, what is it? On dazzling, shiny days, right? It's a beautiful poem that inspired me, Korean poem. How to create, connection between the Han River and the Nam Mountains. the soul of Seoul, as I called it. How do you create something that is part of this amazing city, which I really admire, with its texture of differences and with its network of communications, with a network of possible, how to get through the city, how to organize the city in an incredible way. So my idea was really, I call it the archipelago. You take that grid, you transform the grid by the Yongsan station, you break it into communities, you create a river of retail and of gardens, and you kind of change the entire methodology of how to create a great piece of land here. So archipelago is inspired, of course, by the great cities we know from ancient Greece and so on. They all were cities that were connected by water but had their own beauty and had their own scale. I think I did more than 100 physical models. This was not a project developed on a computer. Worked with physical models, and I think that's the difference. I think, working on the computer, you're farming out your nervous system to a computer, but working with physical hands and eyes, you can really see the importance of what people can touch. And so that's important, that it's not just a fiction of the imagination, that it is really a plan that has been tested, in a primordial way. And of course, I organized the archipelago with ideas, how different architects would then input, so there is there's a sense of the elements, how they go together, elements that liberate the architects working on it to be very creative. And as I said, that's poetic. So there it is. That is my sort of the master plan right on the Han River. And then there is the developed master plan where I work, with Renzo Piano, with SOM, KPF, all the great architects that you probably know on this project in a very realistic way. Well, it's very important, the land use. The business district around the station, the accommodation, the residential, the commercial, the park. That's the key to developing a three-dimensional really sense of space, which is really unique. Part of the genius loci of the place. It's not from somewhere else. It's not from Singapore or from Shanghai. It's unique to this great city. And there it is around its central space. Of course, each building was designed. Each building has its own sense of how to enliven this retail valley, which really runs through from Yongsan Station all the way down to the Han River, and how to make it interesting and varied, because it's not by one hand. There are many different architects who are working on this. And it's really a model of how to create a city of high density that has identity. It's easy enough to do high density, just put a lot of buildings and that's high density, but how to make it really into what I call the art of architecture, not just building. And that's really the beauty of architecture. We have two words. We have the word architecture and building. You can build all you want, but you have no architecture. You have zero architecture. But you can also have architecture even in a drawing which has never been built. So there it is, really. I think there is a small video here if it comes on. Yes, but you can see, I think that in the center was the Renzo Piano Tower. You can see the different architecture, the variety of languages, but all coming together around this harmonious whole. Yes. And you can see here that it's really three-dimensional. It's really about experience. It's not about just looking at it from one. It's what do people feel walking from the low-rise, the historical city? How do they approach the city? The green space of the city, the sculptural quality of the sky, the sense of harmony that is brought by so many different talents, and the fact that in a poetic city, the creative aspect is really the aspect that we really long for, because it's really the spiritual aspect of the city. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
네, 오늘의 첫 번째 세션의 문을 열어주는 기조 강연이었습니다. 다니엘 리베스킨트님의 또 멋진 강연 함께 들었는데요. 어떠셨습니까? 저는 주제가
Well, it was such an outstanding opening key lecture. And how did you find it? Well, the theme is poetic city, and I was expecting a kind of metaphor of a city development plans or projects, but I didn't expect that he would refer literally to the poems. All right, then let's right away move on to the second keynote lecture, which is entitled Urban Identity of Future City, that will be delivered by partner Lee Eui-sung of Morphosis. Please welcome him with a big hand.
안녕하세요. 모비스 파트너 이규성입니다. 저는 한국말 잘 못해서 영어로 프레젠테이션 할 건데요. 좀 이해를 해주십시오.
So my Korean is not that good, so
We
I'm
are
going to
in
speak in
Korea, which is
English.
the most advanced digital country and city in the world. So I'm not going to talk about smart city or AI. You have an entire afternoon about that. So I will present to you 6 projects that talks about these equity issues, about identity, distance, resources, and utilities. I'll give you 6 projects. 5 of them are, each one represents a political strategy, and the final one is on this project I'm doing in Saudi Arabia for NEOM. So the first 3 is a role of green infrastructure in existing cities. And then the second half is what we do if we are given a whole new opportunity to make a new city. So there are many, many issues, but I want to just focus on the role of green infrastructure as one type. So I represent the partner at Morphosis, but I also am the director of the Now Institute, which is urban strategy and urban proposals. It is the Now Institute that we actually, with research, come together toward a strategy for the government or for different groups. So the first fact that I think everybody knows here is that by 2050, 80% of the world's population is projected to live in cities. And because in cities we get together to actually exchange desires and resources, I'm looking at a possibility of a new type of architecture. So the first example I'm going to give you about green infrastructure is a new type of architecture. So this is a project that we did in China, and we are now looking at the possibility of blurring green infrastructure, gardens, parks, with a building. So instead of having building and park, can we mix? So this is now a form of a new type of urbanism that we're trying to get into, where we are trying to basically mix the traditional relationship between a building, architecture, and then between nature. And by the blending of A and B, we can actually come up with a C, which is a new type that we feel is actually interesting for the development of existing buildings. So the interesting thing about having nature as part of the architecture is nature changes. You know, in the winter, it becomes really, really white. In the spring, the flowers come out. And the personality of the building always changes. And you have unusual circulation patterns where you enter in areas that you cannot even imagine in a regular city. And this type of new experience, we feel, is the next paradigm for Morphosis to actually explore in new architecture. So this is part 1. This is the one I showed you in terms of a new type of architecture. Now I will show you urban examples. So the first one is on urban agriculture. I know in Korea, there's been a lot of talk about hydroponics, about urban agriculture. I know it's a very complicated issue. In the world right now, we're looking at an increase of world population and a decrease of farming land. this is a fact. We spend so much time shipping food because everybody wants all the food, all the fruit, all the vegetable in your supermarket all at one time. So we spend a lot of money, and 70% of your price is because of shipping. And 30% of the food is thrown away. $500 billion of fossil fuel on airplanes. The amount of CO2 off too much. Did you know 70% of the world's water is used by farming? Not by you drinking, by farming. So this is the United States. I live in Los Angeles, California. I have to bring all these food from Florida, from Texas, and I have to ship all my vegetables to New York. This is Los Angeles. I have to bring all these food in from the local farmers. So this is the 19th century, 21st century. Maybe we have to fold it. Maybe we have to fold it because land is small, and now we have the technology, we have a good government to support such idea, and we have good designers and good engineers to maybe support this integration. So one example of this is a project
자,
we did
하나의
for a small park
예시인데요. 저희가
in downtown Los Angeles.
작은 공원을 대상으로 진행하고 있는 프로젝트입니다. 저희는 조금은 이제 어떤 하나의 정책적인 혹은 정치적인 선언으로서의 이 프로젝트를 진행을 할 때가 있는데요. 지금 보시는 것처럼 이 사이트를 저희가 진행을 하고 있는데 이 아이디어가 서울에도 한번 적용을 해보면 어떨까 하고
as a symbolic demonstration of the future. So in this one, the tower is a hydroponic urban farming. And the bottom is like very, very high-end Michelin restaurants. So it's farm to table, right? Farm to table. It's to educate the people. Whenever somebody goes by, they go, yeah, what is that? What is that? Ah, that's a crazy tower. There's like fruits in there. So it becomes part of a larger educational process. And then inside the tower, we have the highest level of technology for hydroponics. We will use this and work together with a university to become a living laboratory. So the people watch the laboratory being made. The people watch the future being made. It becomes a public demonstration. And this is part of your public land. So in Korea, you have, I'm Korean, so I think we have one of the best green infrastructure in the world. It's amazing. 근데 하나 아쉬운 게, it's the green infrastructure. The green park is separate from its ability to host different educational functions. So I would just advise if we could mix more issues and use the green infrastructure as part of the larger education and demonstration platform. So that tower is about 25 acres of food. And that hydroponic creates leaves and herbs and vines and like tomatoes. And I'm sorry, I should have made this into Korean, but it's efficient. It grows 365. Korea, we have winter. So during the winter, you cannot have any sun. And so this becomes now a demonstration project. So this is like now my point of discussion as part 2. Part 3. President Obama, we were, my founder of Morpheus, Tom Main, was President Obama's main architect for 8 years, for both of his terms. And President Obama came up with this idea called the Grand Challenges. The Grand Challenges is problems of mankind that he wanted a university to solve. So at UCLA, where I was teaching, we got urban sustainability. So our job was basically how to create a demonstration project for the government in terms of how to make a future proposal. So in Los Angeles, who's been to Los Angeles? Maybe some of you? If you've been to Los Angeles, there is a big street called Wilshire, main spine. It's like Terangno in Gangnam. It's like the main street. So we said, okay, how about we densify Wilshire, but keep 99% of Los Angeles, no change. So they were projected to the White House, back to the President Obama's team as a demonstration project on how to keep LA sustainable. So this was project number 3, right? From now on, I'm going to show you 3 projects that are completely in a new site. And 2 of these are in China, and one of them, the last one, is in Saudi Arabia. So the first one is in Chengdu. So the Chinese government are interested in making innovation centers to make unicorns. Everybody knows what a unicorn company is. So 2013, China had 0 unicorns, 0. In 7 years, they had 50% of the world's unicorn companies. In 7 years. Why? Because they were being subsidized by the government. Okay? In America, like Facebook, Apple, Google, all the unicorn companies, it's all private, right? This is the big difference. So maybe the conversation is, if Seoul or Korea want to be competitive, how much of a subsidized cooperation is worthy? So this is basically all the benchmark that we were looking at in China. So it's Facebook against Alibaba, Facebook against Baidu. And so China has 4 different regions for technological innovation from central government. So we're looking at Chengdu, and we got the first prize. This is actually our winning scheme. So they chose this artificial lake, and it's that island there. And they decided to basically create an entire village for innovation, just to support unicorns. And so one of the things that we were trying to do was, how do you basically create a whole new language where we were using the first building I showed you and blurring nature and buildings and layering it. And so this was our proposal, which won first place. And the idea was that the bottom would be these big volumes for flexibility, for technology, because technology changes so much, and you're looking at startup companies. And then the top would be these new companies that became unicorns, and they have now their own headquarter buildings on top. So right now, what Chengdu and China they're looking at are these walkable, maybe like 1 kilometer by like 800 meters, walkable villages that are dedicated for specific innovation campuses. And this is right now what we're looking at. So if you begin, these are big spaces, big spaces for young companies. You know, 50% will fail, 50% will succeed. And then once they succeed, they go up to the next level, up to here, above the park. And then they have their own building. So it's like this level of competition that you go. So this was one kind of example of a complete new urban typology that we won on behalf of this new strategy from the Chinese government regarding pushing innovation and technology. Eco Island. Everybody who knows China, there's an island called Hainan. Hainan Island at the south of China, next to Vietnam. Okay, it's like China's Jeju-do. And outside of that island, they made this land where the idea was to use this island as a test bed for all their future cities on the mainland. And so we got this project, and it became basically a prototype for future smart city towns. And it was an incubation of unicorn technology. It became a living laboratory, and the size was realizable because it was about 1 kilometer of walking, right? About like 500 to 600, depends on where you are on this time. So this project then became part of that out in the sea. And it was really an incredible, it's like this big mix, like a big pizza with every flavor on top, from urban mobility, air mobility, UAM, to a smart cognitive city based on blockchain governance. The idea of actually farming inside. So the whole idea is, how can you keep one town separate from everything else and keep it self-contained as a self-reliant experiment? So this was one of those amazing mixture of technology, design, strange, interesting social experiment in terms of urban design. So this was going on. So finally, this is my last project I'm going to show you. So this is Neom City. We just came from Venice, Italy, where we were introduced out to the public. And so for the first time, I am allowed to talk about Neom. I've been working on Neom since 2019, for 4 years. So I wrote this. I don't know if you can read this, but it gives you a very quick understanding of how we were in Neom. For the sake of time, I'm going to just move on. So the location of Neom is, part of it is climate, because it's very close to the Mediterranean Sea, and also for geopolitical stability, because it is situated close to Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. And they wanted to bring some sort of political stability to actually ensure a future business investment and a healthy environment. I'm going to show you 4 main ideas that we used to win the competition in 2019. Whenever we have a competition, we like to put some progressive ideas in our design, and you know, if we get chosen, we're very lucky. If it's not, sometimes then we understand the compass of the client. So number 1 is minimize development to maximize natural preservation. That was number 1. That's our idea. Number 2, for the future, can we create small cities based on walking 400 meters in 5 minutes? Can we base a regional transportation no more than 20 minutes? And then, if we're going to build on nature, can that building actually be a helper, a protector of nature, rather than a destroyer of nature? Big question. The 20th century idea about engaging nature is to separate. Now we're looking at an integration, but with the purpose of restorative net positive integration. So those are the four main ideas. So this is what we did in 2019. This is how we won it. Why the line? Everybody asks, why the line? Why the line, right? Answer is very simple. This is the area. I needed to connect three different areas together. One is the beautiful coast. This is the coast of Neom. Very, very beautiful, one of the world's best surfing areas. This is all pictures from Neom. Number two, in the middle is the mountain range. This is the mountain. These are real pictures from Neom. Very, very beautiful area. Number three, the upper valley. This is the red desert. Okay? If anybody's seen Dune, the movie, it's part of that desert. So I ask you, if I asked you how to connect those three areas with the most minimum footprint, what is the answer? The answer is, it's a line. And we're now connecting the three different areas. We said only 5% of the landscape to be developed, 95% to be preserved. This is a progressive mantra that we were really interested in advancing with the government. And so then we were looking at environmental preserves. And in the beginning, we were targeting the population of Copenhagen because for me, Copenhagen is the most humane, the most comfortable, the most progressive city to actually live and to visit. If you were to benchmark any great city, I would say Copenhagen should be on top of your list. Maybe it doesn't match the Asian cities' version of density, Copenhagen. That would be my only concern. But I think Copenhagen was a worthy target. Just for comparison, the size of Neom is the size of Gyeongsangdo. Okay, so that we won the competition based on how to plan this size of land. So we were first looking at maybe 15 districts or small cities as a connection. And so each one of these square is exactly 2 square kilometers. Okay? And so if you were to divide it, it's 1.4 by 1.4. So you look at Seoul. Seoul, that's Gyeongbokgung, right? And the whole area around that, that's around like 2 square kilometers. Every little city here is actually the right size. That's walkable. So now I'm looking at this, looking at maybe a 7-minute walking. And then I multiply that by 4 to create my little town. And then I create about 15 of these, all connected. So you could go from Seoul to Barcelona, to Venice, to Berlin, all in this one trip, right? And the idea was 15 small cities designed by 15 architects. So this was the original way that we won. And the original idea was this complete regular connection of cities, like this. And part of if you were to cut this building, this was a section. So it's about layering. So at the very top is about a walkable neighborhood. On the bottom is a service level, like a really, really big logistical infrastructural unit. And at the bottom is a spine, which has a high-speed train and all the service roads. And so this was the original scheme, and we were designing this thing for about 1 year. And you could see how the idea was that it was free to kind of evolve into different forms and to different shapes. And different clusters, because the line was such a strong framework, it can absorb different designs. It could absorb different phasing. It could absorb different economic evaluations, because the line itself was a very, very sturdy backbone, pun intended. But later on, after the competition ended, Saudi Arabia decided they want to actually advance this much more strongly into a different size. So they asked us to basically take a look at the basics. So the basic is now 400 meters in 5-minute walking. And you double that, then you come up with an 800-meter module. And then they say, you know, we're interested in a 200-meter wide city. And we're like, 200 meters? That's like, that's very, very tight. But this is what they were proposing. So for everybody who looks at the social media and you look at the tall 500-meter mirror version of the line, that's not by any architect. That's not by Morphosis. That's not by any architect. That's actually by the government. And what they did was they took our original line idea and they wanted to make it even more unique, because they felt that our villages, our towns, you could actually find in other places in the world, right? So now the government has now advanced with this idea of this 500-meter tall tower, 200-meter wide. And this is the scale, of course, to a Lotte Tower, just for us here in Seoul. And so, part 2, the mirror line that you see everywhere. So these are slides from the government. So they're talking about 2-minute walking, 5-minute walking, and 20-minute commute. So you can see that they are still very interested in a walkable community, but now it's more vertical, layered. And so they began, this is all public knowledge, so they began to look at the difference between the line, New York City and London, in terms of population and the amount of area on the footprint, on the land. And they began to look at the level of walking. And so this is now the new module. So think of the 170-kilometer line like a train, okay, like a train. But you divide it into these 800 modules, right? So they were now comparing, on a traditional one, if I fold it, can the distance be reduced? Can the distance be reduced? Can you actually have more interesting relationship three-dimensionally rather than a regular city? Can you have more different mixing of programs than a regular city? Can you have more interesting three-dimensional XYZ way of connecting to each other than a regular two-dimensional grid? Can you have more equal distribution of viewing out to the landscape than a regular city? So all these, I'm only showing you 10 out of maybe 50 diagrams, okay? So the idea is that when you actually do go up, can you go inside these neighborhoods that are 400 meters by 100 meters that allows you to have your own community and neighborhood in the side of the building? And so this is right now the basis. So with that government's idea about now the tall mirror version, which is not Morphosis' idea or any architects, Now, the current, my job is to plan and start the first phase of the line. You should know that Samsung Konseol and Hyundai Konseol right now are doing the Kuchorto along this. So there's a big Korean presence already here. So the first one is the hidden marina. This I gave you, I made this just because it might be interesting. This is from like Seoul to Gangneung in terms of 170 kilometers as one building, right? So this is the hidden marina. The line goes over a body of water. That middle area is right now the morphosis scope with maybe 12 architects. Daniel Lipskin talked about his larger master plan where he has to conduct a coordination with many architects underneath him. We're in the same situation. And so this is right now, these are some of the images that have been released to talk about this first phase called the hidden marina. It's designed to accept cruise ships into the marina, and right now it's about 2.4 kilometers long. So we are just beginning this phase, and right now here you could see this is the view of the roof. The garden is at the roof, and you have now a huge marina berth housing about 2,500 boats of different sizes. This is if you were to just approach the line on a nice cloudy day. You just see this one gate. So this big like Daemun is the only time that there's an opening in the line. And so the evolution of this is we have these big cores at every 100 meters. And then I open up the side, like opening up a curtain, like curtain opening, right? To get some light in. And after we get the light in, then I have to now start making this into these different volumes for resonances. So inside there, connecting is a very strange type of landscape that right now we are experimenting with. If you remember my first slide of the landscape building in China, we're doing that again, but a whole new version. So each one of these areas on the landscape side is very, very thick. So there's actually buildings inside these surfaces. And so this is now the landscape that's designed to complement the program on the side. And then we have these major neighborhoods and districts. And each one of these districts have a special relationship with the park. And so these are now I'm going to show you just detail of some of the urban spaces we're making. These are like a little sample of that blade, of how when the park meets some of the building side, what can it look like? Does it work? Does it not work? Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe there are some interesting moments. We're just looking and looking because the mirror line is not Morphosis or any architect's idea. Right now, my job is trying to see if there are good opportunities for community building and for basically spatial experiences. So we're looking at all different types, from the cores, what would it look like on the inside? What does the park look like? This is a generic core, nothing special. What would it be if there's like a CBD, central business district? Is that even possible? What would it look like when you actually have these verticalities and these spaces that you're trying to connect with? What if there are other areas that are just quiet, small parks for families? Is that possible? Is that possible? Is there places where you could see 300 meters down? Is there places where the experience is dynamic and interesting? and where basically you can use the water underneath you and the humidity to control basically the climate. Are other different types possible? So these are just experiments. What I show you, this is not final, but these are questions we have, questions that are very, very different from what we proposed in the competition. The competition is, 15 small villages, 작은 마을, right? Just very, very small, very, very nice, comfortable, right? But this is now, you layer it. So at the bottom is the water. And so now we're looking at, okay, what does that look like? So these are now these moments where we're, seeing we design something, we propose something. This group is coming in with a building city program, or there's a hospital, there's a school, there's like a 편의점, right? Right? Where do we go? So we started to go even smaller and smaller. Where is the little house and the apartment? Where is the neighborhood park? Is there another park up there? Another part. What is the structure? Is this like living in a Korean apartment, right? Or villa, or what? Does it even exist? Can there be all these separate little gardens for each little community or group? Again, none of this is final. These are experiments. And we're looking at all different types of basically urban conditions. And we're trying to make this somewhat comfortable and somewhat meaningful, using basically a lot of resources with the world's architects as well as the world's engineers. So these are other scenes where we're looking at, this is at the bottom near the water. This is when the cruise ship comes in. So that gate is 300 meters tall. The Eiffel Tower is 330 meters tall. The largest cruise ship, the Princess Line, is 70 meters tall. So this is the ship that's coming in that portal. What does it feel like? If the ship is coming in on the right-hand side, what does it feel like if you're out at the edge looking at the ship coming in 2 times a week? And so this is now the ship going through the portal. Right now, this project is called the Hidden Marina. It is phase 1. This is scheduled, hopefully, to be engineered and designed in a few years. And this is my last image with you, and I thank you. Thank you very much.
네, 두 번째 강연까지 잘 들었습니다. 잠시 자리 세팅을 하고요. 바로 이어서 이제 대담이 이어질 텐데요. 다니엘 리벤스키트님 그리고 이민성 소장님의 강연 들으시면서 궁금하신 점이나 혹은 이제 건설
Mr. Daniel Lemiskin and Mr. Yusong, we're going to arrange a seat for a open discussion session. Please jot down your questions on the notepad while waiting for the stage to be arranged. And as you all know, these 2 keynote lecturers are architects at a time, but they are not only focusing on the designing of a building, but they also consider a lot about the value of making a new future city. As you have just heard from Mr. Lee, yes, they have considered how to develop a city in combination with nature and city. Right then, well, before in the past, to construct a building was not only about not destroying the nature and to create a new space, but from now on, we need to see the fusion of or the mixture of nature and buildings and projects. It seems that the stage is ready. Let me invite the three speakers.
서울대 건축학과 교수님 올라와 주시고요. 그리고 다니엘님, 그리고 좀 전에 발표해 주신 이의성 소장님까지 무대 위로 다시 모시도록 하겠습니다. 이세 분께서
Now we would like to invite the two keynote speakers, and then we would have Professor John Hong of Architecture at the Seoul National University. We are going to have a very free discussions, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask the questions. Please take a seat. Well, you can continue to listen to the interpreting services from the receivers if you wish. Now, let me hand over the microphone to the moderator, John Hong.
Thank you for those wonderful talks. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. These talks were really efficient. I'm really surprised. We're almost kind of on time. So I think we can be very generous in the wide-ranging topics we can cover. But I also sort of want to break the ice just with a couple short stories about these two gentlemen in front of us, their generosity, in fact. I don't know if you remember Danielle, but and you might not because you've met so many people around the world. We met around 12 years ago in your office, and it was unannounced. Just very briefly, I was walking down the street with a friend, DJ Spooky, Paul Miller. I think he's a friend of yours. And he says, "Oh yeah, Daniel Liebeskin, he's a good friend of mine. Let's just drop in." I'm like, "You don't just drop in to see a star architect." And so we kind of dropped in unannounced, and the office was very busy, a flurry of activity. And I remember the story because I had met Nina at the time, your partner, and she was also generous to let us in. And you were so busy, but you spent a few minutes talking with us. And it's funny, we're talking about big things today. We're talking about the scale of the city, but it's small sort of moments that you begin to remember the city with. And that was very memorable, the fact that you're so busy, but you're so generous.
Thank you.
And you sat down with us for a few minutes.
Thank you.
A story about Isung. We went to school together at the Harvard GSD, but he was one of these star students that starts an advanced level. So there's those of us that didn't really study architecture beforehand, but Isung had studied architecture beforehand. And when those advanced students come in, there's a little bit of tension because they're advanced, but we don't really know that much yet. So there's a little bit of strange friction that happens. But I remember you must have felt that a little bit, but what was really generous in the late nights, a lot of us, we still don't even know how to draw, but I remember Isung showing us how to draw a section perspective. It's a certain kind of architectural drawing. And I was thinking, wow, it's so generous that he's spending his time. We have these deadlines, but he's actually showing us drawing techniques. And just those little things that you remember, moments of generosity. So thank you both. It's great to see you after these years.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, John.
I wanted to frame this discussion very broadly. Since we're talking about future cities, we usually focus on the future, but the future is also composed of the past and the present and the future. Those three things are, of course, overlaying and so important. So I want...
Of course, I've dealt with many memorials and many tragedies, traumas, but let me put it this way. You can't get away from a trauma. You can cover it. You can attempt to cover a trauma. You can attempt to cover a wound, but if you don't face it, you cannot heal it. And so healing is part also of confronting the past in order to have an open future. And of course, as you said, those things are connected. We cannot have one without the other.
That's a great answer, and this idea that we have to actually face trauma. This is a lot of times in Korean urban history, we begin to erase memories of the past as well, the colonies, colonial.
Look, at Ground Zero, I'll give you a very good example. In the beginning, people wanted two things: rebuild the Twin Towers just as they were. Or another group said, don't do anything for 50 years because we don't know what to do. And so these are, again, the extremist notions. You know, do what you have done before or do nothing. But we have to do something because it's a piece of a city. So my idea was called Memory Foundations. That is the foundations of memory of those who perished and what was there, to create something something that would be inspiring. It's not just building something or just relegating it to the past, but building something that would inspire people with a new idea of New York, new idea of the future. And the new idea is based on knowing the vulnerability of a city.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Thank
yes. Yi-sung, you didn't use the word today, but I was reading through the website and looking through Now Institute, and especially with your work in China, in Chengdu, you used the word, or you used the criticism of the word tabula rasa. So you're building these new cities, and I'm guessing it's on areas that are like the Noam project, areas that have not been urbanized yet, and so this kind of anti-tabula rasa attitude. Could you explain something of this? I mean, in the last project you showed a very amazing idea about that. Don't take up too much land. But in your work in China, for instance, or other areas where you're sort of building ground up, what is the past?
So these are interesting two examples, because clearly, like the NEOM project and the Chinese projects, they are an extension of the government machinations toward an economic strategy. So the project in Chengdu to make unicorns is not because they want to give housing. These are established centers to accelerate unicorn production, for example. And even with NEOM and its controversies, it's right now part of 7 giga projects by the country to find an alternative way when they will lose oil in 50 years. So there is a cause and effect where these certain kind of urban centers do come in. And I very much balance that against the other work that we try to do, which has to do with like cultural sustainability. And in many ways, I really feel that somehow the advent of like these digital technologies can either help projects like the ones that are being done in Saudi Arabia or China, but here in Korea, I think digital connectivity gives us freedom to actually reestablish relationships with ourselves in a very kind of metaphysical Zen way, or with nature, right? These relationships that I think we've lost in the 20th century. And so I'm hoping that in a highly developed area like Korea, there's a new form of relationship being found, where in the other examples I showed, just because the theme is on technology and new urbanism, that it has to do with how do you actually make it into these prototype urbanism, right? And
yes, it's very interesting, and actually you brought up nature too. There is no tabula rasa site. I think that's one of your arguments. Actually, there is nature pre-existing the site, and so there is no such thing. So, yes. Let's move on a little bit to the present tense. We talked a little bit about the past. What are some of the most pressing matters, Danielle? What do you think? What is so urgent right now in the present in terms of how we begin to urbanize or how we design cities?
Wow, that's a really difficult question and very fundamental. But I think everyone living in the world is confronted by really the global village. We are not living alone any longer. where what we are doing here is disconnected from what's happening over there. So once upon a time, what was over there didn't concern us. We could just stay in the, in our sort of space. But now, what's happening very, very far away might really be what's happening in our own backyard. Now, one of the things we see in the 21st century, the beginning of it, especially after COVID, is a general disenchantment with democracy. Many countries are drifting towards successes of authoritarian regimes. And that's always a seduction, because authoritarian regimes can do in a minute whatever they want, because people are only disposable materials for dictators. People don't count. People can be stepped over. You can do whatever you want. But to me, the vulnerability of democracy is really one of the global problems, because it is driven by many, many things. I'm not an expert in the, dividing what it is, but we know it's driven by unhappiness with economic distribution. It's unhappiness in terms of the future itself, fear of the future, fear of being replaced by others or by AI or by robots, or not knowing what your life will be and your life of your family. So to me, that is one of the greatest fears, is really the fear of the future and who's going to take care of us. Now, with a society which has lost, let's say, God as the fundamental, thought, we have God, where can we turn to? Probably Lee Kuan Yew, the inventor of Singapore, had it right. He said, in a society which is completely secular, the only thing that can lead us is education. Education can give us a sense of where to go. So yes, and education is also not only, in my view, education that has to do with information, because that's not really education, that's big data. Education is something about human soul. How do you educate people about the human soul? Let me be very frank. The perpetrators of greatest murders in history were highly educated people. They were not, bullies or just uneducated mob. They were highly educated people with PhDs in history, in philosophy, and so on. So we need another kind of education, which is education that would make us see the world as a wonder, to see the world as being custodians of wonder. And of course, some poets said, you should see everything as a flower. If you don't see everything as a flower, you're missing the world. And if you cannot imagine everything like the moon, you're also in trouble. So yeah, I mean, these are just a few thoughts, but certainly technology and the post-information era, AI, which already is replacing our whole, many of the scientists of AI have come out to say that it's a bigger threat than atomic weapons, because it will completely change the idea of truth. You can put, my son, who's a scientist, astrophysicist, told me that, he explained to me the AI very easily, that if you ask AI, how much is 2 + 2, and it says 4, and you say, no, I don't think it's 4, it's 5. If enough people say it's 5, AI will say 2 + 2 = 5. Now, if I can go for 5 more seconds. It can happen that there is an eclipse of reality. It's not only the eclipse, of the moon. You can have eclipse of reality by constructing a secondary reality and living in that secondary reality and eclipsing the first reality, which is the reality of what we are. But it's not likely to succeed in the long run, in my view, because we've seen secondary realities created by all sorts of systems. Communist system try to eclipse reality by giving you another sense of what reality is. Nazis, fascists declared, we can construct a secondary reality of workers and people together, But we see that there is a human agency at work which is not controllable in that way. And that's, to me, really what we have to address architecture to and city development. It's not to the user, so to speak, but to the human being. And human beings are pretty much alike around the world. You know, I work around the world in many places. And after all, when you go to Africa or Asia, South America, wherever, Middle East where I work, America, you see that people are pretty much the same. They have a family, they have imagination, they have memories, they have a soul. You know, they are usually divided by secondary realities. So I feel very optimistic that all these threats that exist today will dematerialize, because humanity will ultimately, and I'm not just optimist by nature, but I really believe it, secondary realities cannot be sustained. Reality will eclipse them, whatever that reality is. Yeah.
Yes, I think you hit this node of the present tense right now, where the threat to democracy and the secondary reality, they're converging. So that's the
Totally.
danger.
Totally.
But also, I'm really, actually, when you were giving your lecture, I was struck by the way you talked about the client. It was very beautiful. When you were talking about the World Trade Center Master Plan, you talked about, of course, the client being the city and the client being the developers, but you said ultimately the client were the people,
Of course.
the victims.
You know, who's my client in any project? Is a child. A child, you know, I don't know, I think of a 9-year-old, 8-year-old, somebody like that, who comes into a space, and what is she going to experience? What is, you know, it should be that she or he experiences everything is possible in this world. Everything can be beautiful in this world, is beautiful. The sense of wonder. So yeah, that's who I always think, my imaginary client is not my living client. And if you think about the greatest poets like Basho or Shakespeare, they didn't really just write for their immediate audiences, not at all. That's why we still read their books, because they wrote for the unknown client, the stranger, the other. So I always think you should think of the other. You should think of the stranger, somebody who you don't know, somebody who has completely different values than you, who looks different, who's dressed differently, who comes from a different world, but who shares the humanity which is here. And yeah, that's, to me, you know, architecture is a spiritual art. We associate it with a lot with material objects, you know. Unlike music, I used to be a musician. Music is not associated with kind of power, even though music has been used in powerful ways. Music is associated with freedom. So I think too many people associate architecture with unfreedom, with, you know, being given something. But to me, the democracy is the only way to create architecture, because then everybody can be a participant. And I don't mean it emptily. I don't mean it just by voting, I like it and I don't like it. Get people involved in projects. I mean, the reason Ground Zero actually happened, I have to tell you, because many people were skeptical. You know, politicians are so powerful. The investors, the developers with the billions of dollars are so, how can you possibly navigate? But, you know, if you let people be involved, let people say what they want, what they like, you are protected. And as long as that is the sense, I think the world will have a very good development. I think when that is cut off, we have a bleaker possibility.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Isung, Now Institute. It's called Now. Now is the present tense. There's something very urgent about now, and I noticed there's something very urgent about the work, a sense of urgency, like the hydroponic tower that educates. Can you explain what is the Now in Now Institute?
The Now is just being very honest with our partnering group, like the government or a community, and giving them an opportunity to actually do like an X-ray of their current situation. It could be something beautiful, or it could be something that is actually a problem, and giving them the assistance to actually survey and locate the problem, and then giving them different kind of strategies. Here, like in Korea, for example, it brings to mind that, you know, I think we Koreans are an incredibly proud people of our heritage and like legacy. And I used to remember when we were doing like a Now project a long time ago here in Korea, the question was, do you have to be Western to be modern? Do you have to be Western to be contemporary? And back then it was yes.
네,
we want to
예전에는
agree.
네, 그렇게 얘기를
And now the
했었습니다. 약간
answer is
주저하면서
no, you could be
서구가
modern without
모던이다라고
being
이야기를
Western,
했죠. 하지만
meaning,
모던이라는
certain,
것이 꼭
Western processes or Western tropes, right? And obviously there's like a universal baseline in terms of what dignity and humanity affords. But there is also this other separate layer that I think every kind of community or culture wants to respect, which is a certain level of heritage, not in like a going back in a nostalgic way, but in a way that we all have a certain kind of behavioral biases and a way that we as a people come together. And I think we're at the cusp of where those energies, cultural energies, historical energies, can actually produce a whole new like urban spatial typologies. And maybe we will enter now this whole new phase where not all cities start to look the same because of the Miesian legacy of these, these glass towers, but there is actually true richness in unseen cultural and urban venues. And so the Now Institute would go from anywhere from like Haiti, where we were in for like 80 years, to a very contemporary city like Seoul, and try to kind of locate and set the discussion points to advance a new type of spatial awareness. An answer that we don't even know, but we're just trying to guide the journey toward that exploration.
That's great, thinking of projects not as finished things, but as points of discussion, and creating strategies through collaboration rather than the finished city. I think it's a really interesting way to work. Yes, thank you. Let's move on to the future. Questions of the future, and there are things that we can barely imagine that are emerging, and designing for those things is not easy. Like how do you design for something that we don't know? But I noticed, Danielle, in your work, I'm thinking of the skyline in Yongsan, for instance, and then connecting that back to your beginning slides, where you're talking about this sort of this crossing of something that's totalitarian or something that's completely free, something that's regulated beyond beyond our capacity to have agency, or something that's so unregulated it's chaotic. And so your projects, I noticed, they dance that fine and important line. That skyline is not something that we might stronghold and design. Actually, there's something about the undesign of that, the kind of I definitely would not call it cacophony. It's more musical than that, the heterogeneity of that. That kind of emerge, and I think it's not something that one person can design. So it's very interesting, something that has a master plan, but is also very free at the same time. So kind of veering off a little bit, but in terms of the future, what can you tell us about the future? How the way you work, but also the way things are emerging, also things that we may not even understand today.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Well, heterogeneity, difference, complexity, the ability to leave the margins for the unplanned is part of how I plan. So the plan is, a good master plan to me has to be a master that empowers other people to have tremendous creativity. So I see the master plan as the opposite of a straitjacket, where you tell people it's going to be within this distance, it's going to be this long, and it's going to be this high. On the contrary, you empower them with a spiritual or a philosophical idea, and that means that the city is neither a completely sort of authoritative city, which is like in a plan and looks like the picture that you had, or a city that is chaotic and completely ad hoc. Let me give you an example. We think seeing is believing, right? You see, you believe. Whatever you see, you believe. But if you think of operations that restore sight to blind people, there are operations that can restore to a particular kind of blindness. You can restore seeing. So what do you think happens when people have the complete reconnection of the retina, their optic system, the optic nerves to the brain. Nothing. They see absolutely nothing. For a very long time, seeing is not believing. Believing is seeing, because you believe, you're told that you will be able to see, but you see nothing. You see a haze. You see, there are many studies that show it. You don't see any color. You see just areas of grayness. After an arduous process of believing that you will see, you are beginning to see figures and forms, and after a long time, you actually see what we see, as seeing is believing. So I'm not departing from your question, but I think it's important to navigate in a way between order and disorder. Now, Paul Valéry, that great philosopher, great French thinker, at the beginning of the 20th century said, there are two things that are threatening our civilization globally: order and disorder. Those are the threats. So I am always very aware that order is not a good thing, and I'm very aware that disorder is not a good thing. And I think that's true. That's a kind of balance, and you have to sort of navigate. It's a very special way of designing. So when I design something, of course it has to be very precise, right? You cannot design an imprecise, master plan. You have to, every line, everything has to be very, very accurate and completely controllable. But it has to be infused with a kind of sense of spontaneity that can be brought by every participant. Collaboration is not just a word. I believe that architecture is a liberal art. If you go to the Western tradition and to the Eastern tradition, architecture did not originate with a military encampment. It originated with philosophy, with dance, with ritual. It originated with music. It originated with poetry. That's really the ground of architecture. That's what you need to bring to architecture to design even a small, humble dwelling. And we see this, we admire this. When we go to faraway places, we admire something in Africa or in India or somewhere in China that somebody made themselves because they had those qualities. So yes, I believe in the poetic world. I believe that we can retain humanity, because that's humanity, and we can immunize ourselves against the extremes. Well, now we are in a society of extremes. Polarization is global, everywhere almost. People are polarized, yes or no, yes or no. But if you go sort of to the center, you see that that's really the balancing point, the fulcrum on which you can design, I think. And historically, that's where cities come from. They don't come from extremes.
Yes, it's a very nuanced and a deep way to design. To always be in that position, that fulcrum. I think it's very inspiring for me to hear this. And at the end of the day, what you've been saying about imagination, that's actually the future in a way. Always allowing the design so that we can have imagination.
I'm building, after Korea, I go to Israel, where there's a groundbreaking for building of the Albert Einstein Archives and Museum. First building dedicated to the founder of modern, relativity, and everything that we are doing today is based on Einstein's work. And I was very aware when Einstein said, and just remember this, imagination is more important than knowledge. Here is a man who imagined a kind of a new cosmography, a new world of energy and mass, and how space is created. He said imagination is more important than knowledge. How wonderful that kids still have it. And I always think that it's so important to watch kids before they go to a kind of a system of education, because they are the most creative people. That's the humanity. So we should aspire to mature into a children's imagination and a world of possibilities.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Uy-sung, when we think about future cities, I think we saw glimpses of it, really palpable glimpses of it in your work, which was very compelling. I think, from my perspective, I don't know what the impact of infrastructure, for instance, is going to be. But you had air mobility, this kind of speedways underground, the layering of infrastructure. So in a way, as creative as your designs were, they're actually, going back to the systematic way of thinking, they're actually based on future mobility and future infrastructures, things like this. Could you talk a little bit about that and in relation to the future city?
I think first to your broader question, when you talk about the future, the moment you talk about it, you're actually talking about the present, because it's about the projection of present aspirations, present fears of what is missing in our current state, and how the future you long for that future to fill that. And very much part of that is technology. But I think one thing that is for sure is that technology, either good or bad, will advance. And there's two types of technology. One is the infrastructure that you brought up that has to do with mobility and utilities. And then, of course, the larger digital technology that inevitably in Korea, it will advance at an accelerated rate. So those two infrastructural systems, what I call the soft and the hard infrastructure, will advance. And what I'm hoping for is that actually just creates a simple framework that allows a complete unforeseen evolution and propagation of cultural identity and communities inside Korea. So I think, for all the Koreans here, my imagination is that after the IMF of the 1998, 1999, it seems like we entered a phase in Korean society where we had some more 여유, right, more room to look into culture. That's when like the Korean film industry took off. That's when I think like K-pop slowly started to take off. There's like where soft power slowly started to take off in the 20th century, because we did a base infrastructure of housing and transportation. Now, I know the number one problem right now in Seoul and Korea is housing. But I think right now, in order for the housing to actually move forward, I think the infrastructure and the soft and the hard infrastructure needs to be nurtured and move along. I know traffic is another problem, right? Like it is everywhere in the world. And so I know these things are incredibly difficult problems that's kind of actually unfair to talk about just here on a stage. But if there's any way that one country can break away from a 20th century model and make it into a new model for other people to look at Korea, I think Korea is it. We all know that in the past, as Koreans, we looked at all the other benchmarks as like this, 사례조사, and looking at all these other examples. Now, the time has come for other Western and global worlds to look at Korea as an example of how to evolve the existing societal infrastructure. And I hope that time comes, but it requires an integration of government policy, as you know, a complex set of investment, and basically the society's willingness to actually absorb and use it. I love the subway. It's like the best subway system in the world. This is actually the best subway in the system in the world. And when I go back to LA, I get a lot of stress and I get very sad because I'm stuck in this really bad car traffic, right? Why is that so hard to change? And the answer is very simple. It's a political, economic legacy that takes generations of political will to change. But I'm thinking that in Korea, we could actually start to establish those new nodes going back to your infrastructural situations. It's about connectivity. It's about connectivity, and that is right now the basis under Korea. And my last maybe thought is it possible to look at development outside of Seoul and like Busan and Daegu, right, in the rural areas, to instigate a new typology of community building and urban living, right? That becomes almost like a prototype for basically Korean technology, Korean policy, Korean businesses. I know in 그 세종시, in parcel 5-1, Hyundai is developing a new smart city infrastructure as a test bed, right? That's a great idea. I mean, that's a great initiative because you're learning live lessons. Instead of doing a computer simulation, you're learning live lessons. And that becomes a framework for us to have the entire country and the collective will of politics, business, right, and societal needs all grouped into one future planning. And I think that's my big hope for the country.
I think that's a great answer. I think what you're also talking about and asking for is leapfrogging. Basically, progress doesn't happen incrementally. Progress is a disruption. And you're saying in Korea, there's a potential for both in infrastructure, but also in terms of just software technologies to leapfrog and go to the next step. Yes.
And this is the only place I can actually do it.
Yes, let's do it together. I can't believe this time has gone by. I'm supposed to open up questions to the audience, and we have this rare opportunity. Two amazing architects that are so generous. So if we could field a few questions from the audience, please. You can just raise your hand. Don't be shy.
So we're going to have a Q&A session, and one interpreter will come up to the stage for consecutive interpreting for smooth proceedings. And among the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask a question and raise your hand. That we are going to hand over the microphone. City, landscape, and space, any topics, please.
And don't feel intimidated at all. We're all nice people, and I'm sure there's some. Actually, if I was in school, oh yeah, 네.
So we're going to hand over the microphone.
저 뒤에서 젊은 학생들 또 젊은 분들이 많아서 질문할 줄 알고 기다렸는데 안 나와서 앞에서 이렇게 합니다. 저는 한국건설산업연구원장으로 있는 이충재입니다. 그리고 모포시스와는 톰 메인 세계적인 건축가와는 행정중심 복합도시건설청의 청장을 하면서 그 엠브리지 도시 특화를 하는데 여러 번 뵀던 그런 일들이 있습니다. 지금 이제 두 분 연사께서 미래 도시가 어떤 방향으로 나가야 될지 많은 아이디어와 이걸 주셨는데 저희 대한민국에서도 그런 고민을 많이 합니다. 저희가 좁은 국토임에도 불구하고 수도권에 많은 인구와 산업이 몰려 있어서 역대 정부마다 국토의 균형 발전을 많이 얘기하셨고 또 그걸 해소하기 위해서 각 지역 균형 발전을 위한 도시 건설도 많이 했습니다만 지금 세계적인 도시가 대한민국에 서울 말고는 없다고 할 정도로 도시의 경쟁력이 많이 떨어지고 있습니다. 두 분 연사께서 대한민국이 면적이 넓지 않은데 과연 경쟁력 있는 미래 도시를 건설한다면 어떤 방향성을 가지고 어떤 가치를 가지고 또 대한민국의 어떤 특성을 가지고 해야 되는지 하나 말씀해 주시고 또 아까 모피스트 우리 이사님께서 말씀하신 걸 보면은 지금 우리가 수도권 위주로 도시가 건설되고 있는데 세종시나 대구나 부산에 어떤 그 의미 있는 또 특색 있는 도시를 건설한다면 대한민국을 하나의 거대 도시권으로 만들어 갈 수 있는지 그런 좋은 아이디어가 있으면 조언해 주시면 고맙겠습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for the insightful discussion. And I was expecting the questions from my student to sit in the backside, but nobody dared to. So let me be the first person to ask this question. And it is nice to meet you because we have already cooperated with the Morphosis, which was founded by Mr. Tom Lane for the project oriented on the administrative affairs. And thank you very much for the shared many ideas about the direction of the future cities. Well, but in case of Korea, we have a very narrow, I would say, that area of the peninsula, and all the urban development has been implemented centered around the metropolitan region, and that is why we are not sure that if we have done well for the equitable regional developments. And even if we have tried many different efforts for the equitable regional development, Seoul is the only city that is considered to be the global megacity, and that is why regional cities in the Korean peninsula has lost their competitiveness. So to make a competitive future cities in Korea, what should be the values or orientations that we have to pursue in the future, considering the characteristics of Korean Peninsula? Would you like to share your insights and ideas about that? And also the second question, it goes to Mr. Lee from Morphosis. Well, actually, we have developed focusing on the metropolitan area up to now, but if it could make some unique developments about Sejong City or Daegu or Busan, the second or third largest cities of Korea, then do you think we can make a large-scale integrated metropolitan zones as a whole mass for the new development project?
Thank you very much for the question. I think we come to a new phase in Korea, like I said, where we have to be proud of our country's ability to be progressive in certain social values, in technical innovation, and hopefully a government that supports innovation and new modeling. I know as a people, we tend to be very conservative and safe. But if we remain conservative and safe, we are not using our talent in a positive way. We're only using 50% of our brain and our collective ability to innovate and to create a new form of basically society, to advance it. So to your question, if we can start looking and incubating different towns in the countryside that is almost off-grid, that allows you to actually create new lessons from these new models, I think it will go a very, very long way. I know it has to do with a PPP, public-private partnership. It has to do with politics, government, companies, and the local culture. But I feel right now that if you go to, let's say, like Japan, because Japan was a feudal country historically, it has many centers. But Korea has always been a classic monarchy with Hanyang or Seoul as a center. And so it takes a long time to bring some sort of equity to the peninsula. But I think if we can look at prototypical cities like the way that right now it's being done even in China, that will give you the real basis to catalyze a new model moving forward. Industry, housing, and culture has to be merged together within Korea. Right now, it's all separate.
Daniel, please.
Well, I'm not Korean, but I have a very different reading from you about Korea. I met really very fantastic people here, people who are very creative, who are not, inward thinking at all, who are not conservative, who are not looking backwards in time. On the contrary, my experience of working in Korea, and I've been here so many times that some people in our studio think we should be Korean, I feel that Korea is really a model because people are very open to new ideas. They are very open beyond that sort of maybe impression of the exterior. People are very imaginative and really intellectually on a very, very high ranking. Now, I would agree that good development has to take risks. You know, everybody's risk averse in everything except in science, in technology, in AI, in genetics, in every science is not risk averse. It's taking risk to go into areas that have no one had entered before. So I think that is also important to me, as a, what I feel, that I would have never been an architect because, as I said, the Jewish Museum was my first building, but it was an anonymous competition. I never built a single building before that building. And I actually never even designed a building before that building because even though I went to a school of architecture, I had very progressive teachers who allowed me to graduate without designing a building. Why? Because I thought if there is no budget for a building, if there's no political situation of a building, if there is no reason for a building, why engage in imaginary fantasies of second reality? So I never designed a building. So my only observation here is to allow really a free sense of contributions, which could very well be the ones you need the most in a city as sophisticated and a country as sophisticated as Korea. And I think that's really my experience in China, my experience in Germany, certainly my experience in Singapore, where people were thinking really out of the box about development, out of the box about their expectations altogether.
Great. Well, thank you for the question and thank you for the answers. Actually, it's very important that we realize there's forces that pull us back and forces that pull us forward, and that balance is actually is an amazing sweet spot to actually be aware of in terms of the future and the past. What was great about that question was there was an invitation for students to also ask a question in the back. Could we have? Oh yes.
Definitely not a student.
So we're going to have only 10 minutes.
저는
Okay.
CMP 동양의
I am from CMP Dongyang. My name is Chung Kwang-young, and I am a structural engineer. I have a question. Actually, I have an experience of working with Daniel Libeskind, and I worked on a very large project, which is quite political in Korea in particular. And the large project usually is dependent on which government, which political power is in the administration or so. And so in the past, a project was planned, but actually multiple projects went through such destination indeed in Korea. And so, and it's not really easy for one project to be realized due to policies and political reasons and so on and so forth. Do you have any specific ideas or examples which help architectural project to go on regardless of administration?
In a project with Daniel, and as a structural engineer, I have been into many large-scale projects. But in case of Korea, these large-scale projects are quite related to policies or political orientation, or by the terms of a specific politicians who are in charge at that time. So that is why there are many projects that we see haven't seen the closure or the fruits of the planification and many work processes. So what we say is that there's many plannings or planifications, but that there's no finalization. Well, you have experienced a lot of projects overseas, both of you. So if you could have give us some examples of overseas projects that have gone well, regardless of the risks of tenure or terms of politicians or political orientations, would you like to share those cases? And also, if you could suggest us any ideas that we could complete the project regardless of external risk factors, what would that be?
Go ahead, Daniel, yes.
Well, I think every project that I've experienced is a political project. What does politics mean? The politeia, it means the people, the civic society. So every project that I've done has been a controversial project because dependent on the people, people's decisions, people's emotions. I can only tell you that the Jewish Museum in Berlin was not even called the Jewish Museum when I started. It was called the Berlin Museum with a Jewish department. But it was because of the people that the project took a different name, different sense, different idea of content altogether. Ground Zero, as I mentioned, was driven all the time by the people. It was not driven by the politicians because the politicians often wanted something completely different, totally different to be built on the site. But the people of New York decided in a different way. So the projects that I'm pursuing in many places, whether it's in South America, or the Middle East, in China, China perhaps is different because of a different government system. But in my experience, it's only the projects that have truly participatory sense of people being involved that are really interesting for me to pursue. I don't care how big a project is if it's not done by the people. I couldn't care less how impressive it is, how big it is, how massive it is, how important it is. It doesn't interest me. What interests me is expression of people's culture. In each place, of course, has a different sense of that culture. So projects, my own sense is that there is no risk when people are involved, but there is a huge risk when it's top-down, when it's, when it's just top-down. So, for example, the Han River Renaissance, it's a fantastic project that the mayor has because, how to make Seoul, which is such a beautiful city with the Nam Mountains. It's one of the most beautiful cities located in the world on the river. How to make the river more accessible, how to make the pleasures of the origins of Seoul, which really were the origins of the river, available to citizens, not just to tourists, but to people who live here, who don't have that access. So to me, that's really, I would say, the spirit of architecture, is involved the civic realm, the politeia, and that's not just the politicians.
Yeah. I'll bring up 4 projects. In the German city of Hamburg, they basically made a Hafen City, which is this new development, which I think right now, in contemporary terms, I probably consider one of the more successful in terms of its ability to be built, a certain level of livability. The other 2 famous examples that I find a little bit interesting is Dubai and Shenzhen. So Dubai and Shenzhen are always brought up in every urban conference as like the 2 baby cities that became very big. But if you go to Shenzhen, which was laid out by SOM, there was an interesting way how the Chinese culture and Chinese living completely took over this American planning and made it into a Chinese city. Where I think in Dubai, I think the vision of the Sheikh kind of goes all the way through, and it's definitely made for an economic city. Where in Shenzhen, it began as a competitor to Hong Kong, as a twin, but it evolved into an amazingly livable city. And so that's where the power of culture, community, comes in. But the 4th project, though, I will say the most famous reason why a lot of urbanists come to Seoul is Cheonggyecheon. That is single-handedly the one reference that everybody in the world comes to Seoul to look at as an example of vision, timing, government, and investment, right? So I think everybody now is looking for the next big Cheonggyecheon project to kind of define Korea as a reality, you know, because that I think is one, you know, I don't care what your political party feelings are in this room. I think you have to acknowledge that for the people, that was a wonderful gift back to the people, right? So how can we actually find the next version of that moving forward? To your question,
I just want to make a defense of Dubai, where I'm building 2 Baccarat towers in the center of Dubai, and I think Dubai is a very good example of a daring architectural idea that a city that did not exist, 30 years ago at all, created itself not just economically, but because of their fantasy of having an amazing experience for people who will be living there. So really, whether you go left or right, what is in the middle is the quality of design. The quality of design is not just how radical it is in terms of spreading its ideas, but how good it is for people to live and to work and to play in. And look, there are a lot of fantasy projects that have been proposed, and even more radically, they have been built. I live also in Berlin, where the Karl Marx Allee, built by Stalin, it dominates the eastern part of the city. But you can't say that anyone actually enjoys living there. And I've done many proposals, how can we improve? Because Berlin is a vibrant city. But, it's hard to deal with cities built by authoritarians, because they are massive. I was involved in a project in Bucharest, what to do with the Ceausescu Palace, which was built to withstand several atomic bombs. And the conclusion is that there's very little that can be done. Ceausescu destroyed traditional churches, traditional street grid, traditional pattern of living in Bucharest, in Romania, but he built a palace that cannot be destroyed. And I think that's really the extreme. And we should stay away from those extremes.
Yes, yes. I want to hack this a little bit. 질문 하나 더 해도 되나요?
Can we take
I would love
one
it.
last question, perhaps? Yes.
Yeah.
We're
네,
almost
학생이 질문하시죠.
behind the schedule, I think. Do we have any student who would like to ask a question? Okay. The gentleman is far away from here at the back. So we're going to have a lunch soon.
훌륭하신
So please be
강연 정말
brief.
잘 들었습니다.
Thank you so
감사합니다.
much.
저는
It was really wonderful
건축학과에서 석사 과정을
presentation.
공부하고
I'm in
있는
the MA degree
양진영이라고 합니다.
program for architect, and my name is Yang
건축가분께
Jin-young.
질문이 있는데
I have a
김홍
question to each
교수님께서
keynote speaker.
나눴던 섹션별로
For
좀 구분을 하자면 리베스킨트 건축학계는
I have a
가까운
question
미래까지,
to
그리고 이희성
the
건축학계는
Libeskind
현재부터
from
좀 먼
the
미래까지와
past
관련된
to
질문을 드리게 될 것 같습니다.
future.
먼저 리베스킨트
And the
건축학계
question to
질문이
the
있는데요.
Lee Sung, it's going to be the present to the far future. First, a question to Libeskind.
memory 그리고
Seek,
하나 더는
memory, and the other
하나의
keyword
건물도
is
도시에서 큰 역할을 할 수
that
있다라는
one building can play a big role.
프로젝트를 언급하면서 말씀하셨던 것 같은데
I remember, I
그것을
think, if I'm not wrong, you
관통하면서
actually
그리고
mentioned the
특히
MIST
스카이스크레이퍼
project
부분에 들어서는
and entering into the
그것들이
knowledge of the
가지고 있는
skyscraper.
건축적 역할,
You said,
something like
you mentioned the
architectural role in the future city,
architectural wall of the future city.
그래서 그런 것들에 대해서 조금 하나의 일관된 관점을 가지고 계신 것 같은데
It seems like
그에
you
대해서
have
조금만 더
a one
설명해 주실 수
consistent
있으면
view on it. Can you
감사할
please
것
elaborate
같습니다.
on it?
그리고 이 이성
And then
건축가님께는
I have a question to Lee Sung.
조금 제한 공모나
이
혹은
의성.
미래 도시 제한에 대한 프로젝트를 많이 설명해 주셔서
You actually
그와 관련해서 평소에
explained
가지고
about
있었던
many
의문에 대해서 좀 질문을
projects
드리고
for future
싶은데요.
cities that you win from
그런
competitions.
퓨처 프로젝트
And I
같은
have a
경우에는
question that I always
사실은
have in
학교에서
mind.
학생들이 굉장히 많이
As for future
생각해야 될
project,
프로젝트 중
the
하나인데
students often think
쉽게
about
약간
that those
넘버
such
게임,
concepts.
스크롤 게임이 되는 것 같습니다.
But it
이런
seems
근거
like
때문에 이런 행위를 해야 하고
the
이런 숫자 통계 근거를
future
통해서
city that
이
concepts
행동이 앞으로
end
타당성을
up being a
지니기
logic
때문에
games.
뭐이
For example,
프로젝트가
you have to prove the validity and
실현
validation
가능성을
sense on the
가진다,
fourth.
맞다 등등으로
And
학생들이
such logic
프로젝트를
is
별로
required
지으려고 하는 경향이 늘 있는데요.
for
네, 아까
to
그
set up a project.
사우디아라비아에서 다시 제안한
But
약간 네옴시티를
Neom,
보면서도
looking at Neom
한편으로
City
드는
in Saudi
생각은
Arabia,
저
in one sense, I
콜로니컬한
said
스페이스
that
안에서
in such
사람이
a colonial,
정말 행복하게 지낼
colonial
수 있을
space,
것과 같은 넘버로 설명할 수 없는 것들에 대한
I
이슈가
guess
늘 동시에
people can
존재하는
be
것
really
같습니다.
happy. But
그래서 이거는
that's really
학생으로서
small
약간
space.
프로페션에게
So
하는
number
질문에
doesn't
가까울
always
것
explain
같은데
everything about everything
그런
about happiness. That's what
프로젝트에서
I think.
넘버나
So from
뭐 논리만으로
a
설명할
student's
수 없는 그런
perspective, there should be
요소들의
something
설득력을
else
더
other
부여하기
than numbers
위해서
and
저희가
statistics.
프로젝트 수행 과정에서 어떤 일들을 더 할 수
And
있을지,
what
어떤 노력을 더
else do we
기울이고
have to
어떤
do
자료를 통해서 설득할 수 있을지
reflect
이런
such
것에 대해서 어떤
non-number
의미를 가지고
and
계시는지에 대해서
non-figure
질문이 있습니다. 감사합니다.
stuff
Thank you very
in
much for
our
your
projects?
very informative discussion and presentations. My name is Yang Jin-hyuk, and I'm attending a master program of architecture at Seoul National University. And well, I have questions that spans different sections of your presentations, and I have two questions to each speaker. And first, my question goes to Mr. Libeskind, and spanning from the past to the future. Well, I noticed that you have used the word seek and family, and also what was impressive was that you said that even one building can play a critical role in a city, taking an example of Nice project. And also, you said that skyscrapers in a future city can play an architectural role. And it seems that you have a integrated line of thought about these. So would you please elaborate on that idea first? As that's the first question. And the second question goes to Mr. Lee, and that this question should be more about the present and future, because you have presented and shared lots of different proposals for the Future Cities project. And I have also had lots of interest in this area, so that's why I'm asking this project. Well, when it comes to future projects, this is one of the requests that are frequently asked to students at a master's program, and we should be coming up with numbers and also stats, so that we can persuade people that this project should be workable because we have these stats and these ideas and databases, and that is why this project is justified and this is reliable. And this is how we work through when that kind of future project is given as a task. But you have presented a Neom City project, and it seemed to me was a kind of colonial state, and also there's a question of happiness about humanities or people who live inside that state. Then this happiness cannot be explained only by numbers, and this is a critical question. Then this may be a question from a student to a professor. To persuade a client, for instance, or the project giver, how can we make our effort, in which way, or what kind of materials or documents should we come up with so that we can work this project as a success?
Yes, Daniel, please.
Maybe to answer first, and I'll think about it.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for that question. The basis for anything that we do from an urban design point of view is to enrich the community and the residents who have contacted us for the project. And I say again, it ranges everything from how to make the city in Haiti into a whole new UNESCO future by utilizing the local culture, all the way to even Neom you brought up, because with Neom, you remember we began with actually 15 small towns that are to be developed over many, many years by different architects. And now, with this engagement of this new form given by the government, our attitude is we could get away from it and not do it. Or even if I can change 1% or 2% to make it a little bit better under those constraints, I would like to be that architect that's going to try to make it a little bit better. You know, so we have this this idea in places where they're trying to push the level of innovation or other type of planning. It's if you need to change, you have to engage, even if it means changing the needle only by 1 or 2 degrees. Of course, you want to change the needle a lot more. Now, you're going back to a very famous question that all my students ask. So all my graduate students ask me the same question about the numbers. The numbers are there only for you to use in a specific kind of meeting, right? So you're right, it is sometimes used to validate an argument because you're coming in with an incredible story on how to live a beautiful, dignified life in this planning design that you made, right? But when you talk about beauty, dignity, it tends to be highly personal. And so sometimes it's hard to bring a cohesive gathering together. For example, if I ask everybody here to, in their head, to think of the color red, I bet everybody will have a different color, right? So I need to kind of present what a red is, and then everybody can say, no, it's too bright, it's too dark, it's too light, and at least there's some commonality. I bring that as part of the story I bring to city planning, because I always deal with communities. And then because I have to now connect with the World Bank or the United Nations or investment groups, they don't share those stories with the local residents. The only thing these guys share are sometimes numbers. And so those numbers should never drive a design, but they are always, if I were to tell you, maybe 1/4 of the information that you bring to basically present to a group, to convince them to be a team member so we could actually go ahead and build these cities. So if you got a professor that's telling you everything's about numbers, I would say maybe push back a little bit.
Okay, I think it's my turn.
Yes. Sorry, I'm not really
You asked a very interesting question about how a single, let's say, small project can change a city. The project that I'm actually most interested right now is I won two competitions in New York for social housing. You know what social housing is? It's housing very low cost, 30% homeless people. Because I've done a lot of luxury projects. I'm not interested to make more luxury projects. I wanted to show that in designing, a New York City public housing agency project for very poor people or people who have no home at all, you can create something on a very low budget, which is an extremely high impact, not only for the people who live there, but for the neighborhoods that are so damaged and so poor that the single building, and I'm doing a building of some hundreds of units of social housing, but a building that, even though it's not complete, it will be completed very soon, you can see already how dramatically it has changed the idea of people who live in this neighborhood, what this neighborhood is. So affordable housing is something I'm pursuing very seriously. I've done enough luxury buildings, but what interests me is high density housing at a very, very low cost. Because usually when you see those projects, you just want to close your eyes and say, oh, that's just for the poor people. That's, there is no star architect who can do anything about it because the budget is so low. But I think in a short time, you'll be able to see those projects. And to me, that is kind of a notion of how you can change a city. You don't need to rebuild 3/4 of the city with new architecture. You need to find the spots, like they do in acupuncture, which show the critical seismic sort of points which really the city lives from, which remain sometimes unaddressed and therefore cause an issue to the whole body organism. So I've done that in a number of projects, not huge projects, but I think projects that have probably more impact than many, many large urban scale projects that take acres and acres of land and take a long time to construct. So my recommendation for a city like Seoul that is so incredibly interesting, there are many spots that I've identified just by walking around that are not huge sites, but could be really quintessential to transforming the city. And if you think of the church you go to, or the small park you visit, or a place that is old but has significance, you can see how those small aspects of the city really create a very large emblem of the city. And so, yes, one should think not only of the overall huge strategic projects, but find the vulnerable sites that nobody is looking at, nobody's interested in, because they don't seem commercially viable, but in fact are really golden treasures to be found.
Well, great. I think this is a really nice way to end.
Thank you.
And I want to thank the generosity of our architect today, and thank you also to the audience for participating.
And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you to two keynote speakers and one moderator. Thank you. Please go back to your seat. So we're behind the schedule at the moment, and the next session will get started at 1 p.m. So please feel free to have your meal during the lunchtime. And 2 o'clock is the time for the second session. So please make sure you also carry your belongings. And in the afternoon session, you may use the audience seat on the first floor. Thank you.